In the heart of Venice, inside a library that smells of salt and dust, a dim light flickers over rows of forgotten manuscripts. The air is thick with the breath of centuries. Shelves lean like tired sentinels, their wooden bones creaking softly as if whispering to the ghosts of scholars long gone. At the far end of a narrow corridor, a single table holds a sealed leather box, cracked and darkened with age. The archivist's gloved hands tremble as he opens it, unaware that what lies inside could rewrite the story of the world. Within the box rests a folded parchment, fragile, yellowed, and stained by time. Its corners curl inward like a secret try to protect itself. The archivist gently unrolls it, expecting another medieval trade route, another forgotten cartographer's dream. But what he sees instead freezes him in place. Across the faded lines of the known world, Europe, Africa, and the Western Ocean, there is something drawn that should not exist. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, beyond where the world was believed to end, lies a vast landmass that no map of the 15th century should have known. A continent that vanished beneath the sea thousands of years before the first ship ever sailed across the Atlantic. The lines are delicate, deliberate, and impossibly precise. Coastlines are shaped with mathematical confidence. Mountain ranges sketched with an artist's hand. The name inscribed above the mysterious land reads in faded Latin, Regnum Antiquum Atlantis, the kingdom of ancient Atlantis. The archivist whispers the word aloud, Atlantis, and the room seems to hold its breath. It is a name burdened with myth, a story born in Plato's imagination and buried under centuries of ridicule. Yet here it is, inked onto a real map, crafted by a Renaissance hand that should have known nothing of such a place. At first, disbelief takes hold. The archivist assumes it must be a forgery, a fantasy drawn by a dreamer or a charlatan. But the parchment itself tells another story. The texture of the vellum, the composition of the ink, the meticulous Latin script, all are authentic to the late 15th century. The map predates Columbus, predates Magellan, predates the very idea of a new world. How could anyone in Renaissance Europe have drawn land beyond the Atlantic Ocean before it was known to exist? News of the discovery travels quickly through the academic corridors of Venice. Experts gather around the parchment, their magnifying lenses glinting in the lamplight. They debate in whispers, afraid their voices might disturb the ancient silence of the document. One professor argues that it's allegorical, a symbolic depiction of Plato's myth, not a geographical record. Another insists that its mathematical accuracy cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The map's coordinates, he notes, align disturbingly well with undersea formations in the mid-Atlantic ridge, regions later revealed only through 20th century sonar imaging. It is as if the cartographer had access to knowledge far beyond his time. The narrator's voice softens, describing the haunting detail of the discovery. How human hands, separated by 500 years, now touch the same surface once held by a man who may have believed he was recording the last trace of a lost world. In the candlelight, the ocean painted on the map shimmers faintly, as if alive. Its waves seem to move with the breath of the room, and for a moment, one might imagine that the map itself remembers. Outside the library, the city of Venice is quiet. Water laps against stone foundations, and gondolas drift like black shadows beneath moonlight. The scene mirrors the map's subject, a city built on water, suspended between survival and submersion. Venice has always lived with the sea's mercy, just as the lost world of Atlantis was said to have died by it. Perhaps, the narrator wonders, this is why the map was found here, because no other city in the world understands the thin line between land and drowning as deeply as Venice does. But questions linger like ghosts in the dark. Who drew this map? And where did the information come from? The handwriting offers few clues, elegant but anonymous, the script of a trained scribe. No signature, no date. Only a cryptic insignia stamped into the parchment's lower edge. A circle enclosing a compass rose, flanked by 12 small dots. Some claim it resembles the symbols used by secret Renaissance societies, groups of scholars and map-makers sworn to protect ancient wisdom from the Church's eyes. The camera moves closer, lingering on the compass rose as the narrator's voice deepens. It is said that some Renaissance cartographers believed maps were more than navigational tools. They were acts of remembrance. To map the world was to honor what once was, not only what is. Perhaps this map, drawn in secrecy, was never meant for explorers or merchants. Perhaps it was a memorial to a world erased, a silent rebellion against the arrogance of forgetting. In the following days, the archivists locked the parchment away in a protective case, yet the whispers around it only grow louder. Scholars call it the Forgotten Map, while conspiracy circles claim it's the long-lost Atlantean chart. Some say it is a hoax. Others argue it's proof that ancient civilizations possessed global knowledge long before the dawn of recorded history. But the truth remains elusive, buried under layers of ink, myth, and salt. As the scene fades, the narrator draws us deeper into the question that will haunt the entire story. What if this isn't just an artist's imagination? What if the map is a fragment, a surviving shard of knowledge passed down through centuries, copied and recopied by those who refuse to let the memory of Atlantis die? And if that is true, what else might still be hidden in the world's forgotten archives, waiting for the right pair of eyes to find it? The final image lingers on the map itself. Its faint blue oceans, its ghostly lines, its impossible continent. The parchment flutters slightly under the breath of the archivist, as though exhaling the secret it has held for centuries. The narrator's voice fades into the darkness with a single, haunting question. If a map can remember a world that no longer exists, then perhaps the past itself is not lost, only waiting to be rediscovered. And with that, the story begins. The Renaissance was an age of rebirth, yet beneath its beauty and brilliance, it was also an age of longing. Europe was awakening from the dark slumber of the Middle Ages, an awakening not only of art and philosophy, but of memory. In the quiet chambers of Florence and the candlelit monasteries of Venice, whispers of forgotten worlds stirred again. Scholars, artists, and alchemists pored over crumbling manuscripts rescued from the ashes of Byzantium. They believed that the ancients had once possessed a complete knowledge of the world, geography, astronomy, and divine truth, and that modern man had inherited only fragments of it. To recover that wisdom was to restore humanity's lost perfection. The world was changing. Ships sailed farther each year, driven by curiosity and gold, by faith and fear. The printing press spread ideas faster than the church could silence them. And yet, beneath this outward progress, a strange hunger grew, the desire to uncover the lost roots of civilization. Men like Marsilio Ficino translated Plato's dialogues with feverish devotion, believing his words contained not merely philosophy, but prophecy. When Plato spoke of Atlantis, many Renaissance scholars did not hear myth. They heard warning. In smoky Venetian taverns, among merchants and sailors, tales circulated of unknown islands glimpsed far across the Western Ocean. Some said they were mirages, tricks of light upon the sea. Others swore they were real. Sailors from Portugal, storm-tossed and half-mad, claimed to have seen peaks rising from the waves before vanishing again beneath storm clouds. To a Renaissance mind, these stories were not dismissed, they were invitations. The ocean was a veil, and beyond it might lie the ruins of the first civilization. Florence, the beating heart of humanist thought, became a workshop of rediscovery. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Botticelli filled their notebooks with sketches of perfect forms and circles that symbolized divine harmony, echoes of Plato's geometry of Atlantis. To them, mathematics was not just science, it was the language of God. They believed the world had once been built according to those same principles, a sacred symmetry that the flood had shattered. Every discovery, every drawing, every invention of the Renaissance was an act of defiance against loss, a refusal to let the memory of perfection vanish forever. In this atmosphere of obsession, maps became more than tools for navigation. They became instruments of imagination, canvases on which men could paint the invisible. Cartographers were not mere craftsmen. They were visionaries, attempting to merge myth with measurement, the divine with the physical. And among them were a few who dared to chart not only the known world, but the forgotten one. They filled the empty spaces of their maps with speculation, strange coastlines, and warnings. Hic sunt dragons, here be dragons. But sometimes, amid the dragons and the sea monsters, a faint outline of a lost land would appear. Venice, with its labyrinth of canals and merchant fleets, was the perfect cradle for such dreams. Knowledge flowed into it like the tides. Greek manuscripts from Constantinople, Arabic cosmographies from Cordoba, star charts from Egypt, all found their way into the city's archives. It was here that the greatest mapmakers of the Renaissance worked, under the patronage of dukes, explorers, and even popes. And it was here that a strange rumor began to circulate among them, of a chart that described lands far to the west, drawn from ancient sources no one could identify. Some said the information came from Moorish scholars. Others whispered of manuscripts once held in Alexandria before its fall. But the details were always the same: a continent across the ocean, rich and vast, long before Columbus dreamed of it. The Renaissance was not only an age of discovery, but also of heresy. The line between science and blasphemy blurred dangerously. The Church watched the spread of ancient ideas with growing unease, for they suggested a world far older and far larger than Scripture allowed. To claim that ancient men had charted the globe, that they had knowledge rivaling divine creation, was to invite suspicion. Yet curiosity could not be stopped. In the name of art, astronomy, or alchemy, men continued to dig into the past, each discovery bringing them closer to the edge of forbidden truth. Among these seekers was a quiet fraternity of scholars, mapmakers, and astronomers who called themselves custodes antiquitatis, the keepers of the ancient. They met in secrecy, exchanging fragments of lost manuscripts, comparing notes on ancient coastlines and celestial patterns. To them, the legend of Atlantis was not fantasy. It was a record of a forgotten epoch, a time when humanity walked with the gods before pride brought ruin. They believed that knowledge from that world had survived in symbols, in art, and in the cryptic geometry of old maps. In dim candlelight, these men would unroll charts copied from Moorish archives, their ink faded to brown, their legends half erased. They studied the lines that did not match the known world, tracing them with reverent fingers. Sometimes they would find drawings of strange coastlines that curved like the edge of memory. They spoke of them in whispers, calling them ghost continents. Each line, each curve, seemed to hint at a hidden inheritance, a memory too ancient to die completely. The obsession spread through Europe's intellectual circles like fire. Explorers searched for islands described in Plato's words. Nobles funded expeditions, hoping to find the ruins of a lost empire beneath the waves. Every discovery, a strange artifact, a peculiar current, a mountain rising from the ocean floor, became a sign, proof that the myth might yet be real. And though most found nothing, a few returned changed, haunted by what they could not explain. The narrator's voice slows, almost mournful. The Renaissance, for all its brilliance, was a civilization haunted by another. Beneath its marble beauty and mathematical perfection lay a deep, almost spiritual yearning to remember something that had been erased. The artists sought it in proportion, the philosophers in truth, the alchemists in gold. But the mapmakers sought it in the silence between the continents. And so, in a world intoxicated by rediscovery, where faith and reason wrestled in candlelit rooms, one anonymous cartographer began his life's work. Hidden behind the guise of royal commissions and nautical charts, he drew not only what could be seen, but what was remembered. He blended the geography of his time with fragments of something older, stories whispered from Egypt, measurements from Arabic astronomers, and symbols traced from Plato's dialogues. It is here, in this feverish world of rebirth and remembrance, that the forgotten map takes its first breath. It is born not of imagination alone, but of obsession, the Renaissance hunger to rebuild what the world had lost. And somewhere, in a narrow Venetian workshop smelling of ink and seawater, the anonymous cartographer bends over his desk, candlelight flickering across his tired eyes. He dips his quill into the blue-black ink and begins to draw the outlines of a vanished world. A world that should not exist, and yet somehow does. He was known only by his initials, A.M. No full name survives in any record, no portrait in any gallery, no signature on any royal decree. Yet the few fragments that remain hint at a man, both genius and ghost. In the margins of weathered manuscripts, his initials appear in elegant script, often beside sketches of coastlines and celestial spheres. To most historians, he was just another Renaissance cartographer, one of the hundreds who mapped the world for kings and merchants. But to those who have studied the forbidden map, it was something far more dangerous, a man who knew too much. His story begins in Venice, sometime around the year 1487. The city was alive with the scent of salt and ink, its narrow alleys echoing with the cries of sailors and traders. Inside a modest workshop overlooking the Grand Canal, A.M. worked under candlelight, surrounded by scrolls, globes, and compasses. His patrons were wealthy nobles and explorers seeking fame and fortune across the western seas. But unlike others, A.M. did not simply copy existing charts. He drew maps that whispered of lands unseen, of coastlines that existed nowhere in known geography. Some accounts claim that he studied under the famed cosmographer Henricus Martellus, whose maps would later influence Columbus himself. Others believe A.M. worked for the Vatican's secret cartographic division, an organization known to quietly fund projects that merge geography with theology, seeking to reconcile the physical world with divine scripture. But his private notes, written in a ciphered Latin that took modern historians decades to decode, reveal an obsession far older than any religious mandate. The old world sleeps beneath the waves, one entry reads. Its memory lingers in the stars and the measure of the earth. He spoke of sources no one could trace, manuscripts inherited from Arab scholars, who in turn claimed to have preserved fragments from Egypt and beyond. In one particularly haunting passage, A.M. refers to an ancient chart of the world drawn before the Great Flood, copied and recopied through generations. He believed this original map, the primus orbis, was not a myth but a record of civilization that predated all known history. To him, the task was not discovery but restoration. He was not inventing new lands. He was redrawing what had been lost. A.M. was meticulous. His surviving sketches show a mastery of geometry and proportion uncommon even among his peers. He used techniques of triangulation and projection centuries ahead of his time. On one surviving page, a faint annotation reads, "Latitude from the stars, longitude from memory." Scholars still debate what that phrase means. How could longitude, impossible to measure accurately until the 18th century, be determined from memory? Unless, of course, his memory referred not to personal recollection, but to inherited knowledge, fragments of data passed through secret manuscripts and oral traditions. There are stories, too, of his association with a mysterious brotherhood. The Circle of 12, a society of mathematicians, alchemists, and philosophers who believed that the earth had once been home to a divine order destroyed by its own arrogance. They saw themselves as guardians of fragments, protectors of maps, texts, and symbols that the church would never allow to survive in the open. Some even suggest that the circle's emblem, a compass enclosed in 12 points of light, matches the insignia found on the bottom corner of the forgotten map. In the coded correspondence between members of the circle, A.M. is described as the keeper of the western flame, a man entrusted with preserving the knowledge of a drowned kingdom. The documents imply that he had access to the Vatican's restricted archives, where banned manuscripts from Alexandria and Arabic scholars were quietly stored. From these, A.M. may have pieced together hints of a lost geography, merging mythology, mathematics, and sacred proportion into something terrifyingly coherent. But genius often comes at a cost. His work began to draw suspicion, in a time when the church held dominion over knowledge. To suggest that the world's true shape differed from Holy Scripture was heresy. The whispers began that A.M. was consorting with occultists, that his maps contained blasphemous geometries linking Earth to fallen civilizations. One surviving record from an inquisitorial report describes a cartographer of Venice whose works confused divine creation with the arrogance of ancient men. Though his name is redacted, the description fits him perfectly. Then, suddenly, around 1490, he disappears from the record. His workshop is closed. His assistants vanish. Some say he fled Venice under false identity, taking his most secret map with him. Others claim he was arrested by papal agents, his materials confiscated and sealed within the Vatican. There is even a darker tale, that his death was staged, his knowledge absorbed into a larger order sworn to keep it buried. Whatever the truth, was erased almost completely, leaving behind only fragments, scattered annotations, a handful of sketches, and a mysterious map that would re-emerge centuries later. Yet, the map itself bears the mark of his mind. Its geometry reflects his style, precise, elegant, visionary. Along the margins are faint Latin inscriptions describing stars, ocean currents, and strange measurements that defy the era's navigational understanding. Most chilling of all is the single line written in his unmistakable hand, taken from the old ones, whose empire drowned in fire and water. The narrator's tone deepens, suggesting that perhaps A.M. did not work alone, nor did he invent the map entirely. Maybe he was merely one in a chain of preservers, scribes who copied from copies, each trying to keep alive the knowledge that others sought to destroy. The Renaissance had many artists, inventors, and thinkers, but was something else entirely, a cartographer of memory. He did not chart the seas of his time, but the ghosts of a world that no longer existed. As the candlelight fades in his workshop, the image lingers. A solitary man hunched over a desk, ink-stained hands trembling as he draws the outline of a vanished continent. Behind him, outside the window, the city of Venice glows upon the dark water, fragile, impermanent, like Atlantis reborn above the waves. The narrator's voice softens. Perhaps was not searching for a lost world at all. Perhaps he was simply trying to remember it. And somewhere, buried in an archive centuries later, his forgotten work waits. A map that should not exist, drawn by a man who should never have known what he knew. When the map resurfaced in the early 1900s, it did not emerge in a blaze of fame or glory, but in the quiet gloom of a private collection. A forgotten parchment, purchased at an estate auction in Lisbon, lay rolled in a velvet-lined case beside old maritime charts and explorers' journals. It caught the eye of a certain Professor Edmund Haldon, a scholar of early navigation, known for his eccentric fascination with anomalies. At first glance, it appeared ordinary, a beautifully detailed Renaissance map, faded by time, bordered with Latin script and coastal markings. But when Haldon placed it beneath the soft light of his study, he noticed something deeply unsettling. The proportions were wrong, not by mistake but by design. The map's grid system, instead of following the typical Mercator or Ptolemaic projection, was constructed around a series of interlocking triangles and circles. Every continent, every ocean current, every latitude line seemed to follow a mathematical rhythm, a strange harmony of ratios and angles that echoed principles not seen until the age of modern geometry. To Haldon's astonishment, even the spacing between mountain ranges and coastlines followed a pattern eerily consistent with the golden ratio, the same proportion found in seashells, spiral galaxies, and the architecture of sacred temples. At first, he dismissed it as coincidence. Perhaps the artist had simply been gifted with aesthetic intuition. But the deeper he examined, the less accidental it seemed. The scale of the oceans matched the geometry of the stars. Latitude lines aligned with solstice points. Even the shapes of the continents themselves appeared to fit within an invisible lattice of perfect mathematical balance. Whoever created the map wasn't just drawing the world, they were encoding it. Haldon began tracing the geometric web with compass and ruler, following its strange internal order. He soon discovered that the entire design could be overlaid with a structure resembling the flower of life, a sacred symbol used since antiquity, from Egyptian temple carvings to Kabbalistic mysticism. When projected onto a globe, the same geometry linked key points: the Great Pyramid of Giza, Easter Island, Machu Picchu, and several unexplored oceanic regions. At first, Haldon was elated. He believed he had stumbled upon the philosophical proof of an ancient unified knowledge, a map not of territory, but of truth itself. Yet the deeper he went, the more sinister the pattern became. One night, while calculating ratios across the Atlantic portion of the chart, he found something that made his hand tremble. The geometric center of the entire design, the point from which all circles and lines emanated, did not rest upon any known landmass. It lay instead in the heart of the Atlantic Ocean, at coordinates where, according to modern sonar, a strange plateau exists beneath the waves. Haldon stared at the numbers for hours, the realization slowly dawning. The map was pointing to a place that shouldn't exist, a land long dismissed as myth. He began cross-referencing ancient texts, from Plato's Timaeus to Arabic maritime logs and Egyptian temple inscriptions. Each seemed to echo the same idea, a knowledge system derived from sacred geometry, linking the heavens and the earth through proportion and resonance. The forbidden geometry, as Haldon came to call it, was not merely mathematical. It was spiritual, symbolic, and cosmic. It described how energy moved through the world, how civilizations built their cities along invisible lines of power, and how those lines had once converged upon a single vanished continent. Weeks turned into months. His study became a labyrinth of compasses, parchment fragments, and string lines connecting maps across the walls. He stopped attending university lectures, stopped responding to colleagues. The few who visited him in his final weeks said he spoke of vibrations in the earth, of an alignment that was reawakening. One of his last journal entries, written in hurried ink, read, "The pattern repeats." The geometry was never lost. It was buried. They feared its return. But what terrified him most was not what he discovered. It was what the geometry seemed to do. When he plotted the points in 3 dimensions using early mechanical models, he noticed something inexplicable. The structure began to form a kind of resonance, a harmonic frequency when measured against the Schumann resonance of Earth itself. It was as if the geometry wasn't static, it was alive. Each proportion corresponded to a vibration, and when aligned correctly, it produced a tone, a low, haunting hum, almost imperceptible to the ear. Local rumors tell that on one of his final nights, Halden invited a small group of students to witness an experiment. Using mirrors, light, and the projected map, he recreated the geometry in his study. According to the sole surviving witness, the air seemed to tremble. A faint vibration passed through the floorboards, shaking the glassware. The map, illuminated by candlelight, appeared to shimmer, as though the lines were moving. Moments later, the candles extinguished themselves, plunging the room into darkness. When the lights were restored, Halden was gone. Only the map remained, lying flat on the table, unburned, unmarked, perfectly still. Authorities later declared him missing. His notes were confiscated, many of them sealed in university archives under the classification of private estate documents. But whispers persisted among academic circles that Halden had found something he was never meant to find. Some claimed he vanished because he proved the forbidden geometry was real, that he had triggered something dormant within the Earth's magnetic field. Others believed he went mad, consumed by the perfection of the pattern. Yet a few quiet voices suggest that the geometry was not madness at all, but memory, a code imprinted in the world itself, waiting to be rediscovered. Years later, when a photographic copy of the map was studied under ultraviolet light, faint inscriptions became visible. Invisible ink drawn along the lines of the geometric web. The words, written in Latin, read, "Omnia redurnt." Everything returns. Perhaps that is the true essence of the forbidden geometry. Not merely a mathematical system or an occult diagram, but a prophecy that the world's lost harmony, buried beneath waves and centuries, will someday reawaken. And when it does, the Earth will once again remember the shape it was always meant to hold. The name at the edge of the map, written in fading Renaissance ink, had long been assumed to belong to a minor cartographer of the 16th century, Lorenzo di Rossi. To most historians, he was little more than a footnote, a skilled draftsman who worked under royal commissions, drawing trade routes, coastlines, and celestial diagrams for wealthy patrons in Venice. But when researchers began examining his surviving journals, a stranger picture emerged, one that did not fit the mold of a simple artisan. Lorenzo was not just a map maker. He was an initiate. Born around 1509, Lorenzo studied at the Accademia degli Studi in Florence during the height of the Italian Renaissance, an era when art, science, and mysticism blended freely. The same minds that painted divine frescoes were also dissecting corpses and decoding the stars. In this atmosphere of knowledge and secrecy, young Lorenzo apprenticed under mathematicians who studied both navigation and the hidden geometry of the cosmos. His notebooks, now scattered across European archives, reveal sketches of not only coastlines and harbors, but intricate spirals, planetary sigils, and sacred numerical patterns, ideas far beyond what a conventional cartographer would have needed. What stands out most in his writings is an obsession with the perfect world. He wrote that every map before his time was a shadow of truth, distorted by human imperfection. But Lorenzo believed there was once a divine model of the earth, a pure geometric form created by God or some ancient intelligence, and that his mission was to rediscover it. In one particularly haunting entry, he wrote, "If I could draw the earth as it was meant to be seen, its song would awaken once more." His fascination deepened when he encountered a mysterious patron in Venice, a cloaked man who, according to a surviving letter, introduced himself only as the archivist. This patron provided Lorenzo with access to secret maritime logs taken from Portuguese voyages, maps that were said to have been copied from sources older than the flood. These records described coastlines that no longer exist, lands that had sunk beneath the sea, and islands that appeared only during certain celestial alignments. Lorenzo was instructed to combine these fragments into a single grand chart, one that would reflect the true face of the earth. The commission was unlike anything he had ever received. For months, he worked in secrecy within a rented room near the Venetian docks. He wrote of sleepless nights spent drawing by candlelight, guided by dreams in which shapes and symbols appeared before him. Sometimes, he claimed, he woke to find that he had drawn lines and circles without realizing it, as though his hand were being guided by another force. The finished work, he wrote, would not be a simple map, but a mirror between worlds. As his work progressed, his correspondence became increasingly cryptic. In one surviving letter addressed to his brother, he wrote, "The map hums when touched by the morning light. I fear I am no longer drawing it. It is drawing me." Other notes reference strange visitors, scholars, astrologers, and even priests who came to view his progress. Among them, one stood out, a Dominican friar named Bartolomeo, who warned Lorenzo that his geometry resembled the forbidden patterns once used by the Pythagoreans, those believed to tap into divine creation itself. The friar urged him to destroy the map before it attracts the eyes that never close. But Lorenzo refused. He believed he was on the verge of revealing something monumental, the forgotten harmony between earth, sea, and stars. When he completed the map in 1547, he described the experience as both exalting and terrifying. "I saw the world breathe," he wrote in his final entry. "For a moment, I heard its pulse deep beneath the waves, and I knew it was not dead." What happened next is unclear. The Venetian records show that in the summer of that same year, a fire consumed a section of the docks where Lorenzo had been working. Several nearby warehouses burned to ash, and many ships were damaged. Among the destroyed items was said to be a collection of maritime charts. Lorenzo himself was declared missing, presumed dead. Yet within weeks, whispers began spreading through academic circles in Florence and Rome. A single map had survived the blaze, rescued by an unknown hand and delivered to a secret archive connected to the Medici. For centuries, no one knew if that story was true. But in 1909, when Professor Edmund Haldane obtained his mysterious parchment, the signature in the corner left little doubt. Laurentius Rossi, Venetia, Anno Domini, MDXLVI. The handwriting matched the surviving letters. Even the watermark in the paper was identical to that used in Venetian workshops of the mid-16th century. But it was the ink, faint, metallic, unlike anything catalogued, that drew the most attention. Analysis later revealed traces of pulverized lapis lazuli and an unknown mineral compound that fluoresced faintly under certain wavelengths of light. Some suspected it was a pigment meant to last forever. Others claimed it was a code, a kind of invisible writing that would reveal itself only when the world was ready. And there was one more discovery. Hidden beneath the layers of paint and ink, barely visible even under magnification, lay a second, older signature. It was a single word, Solon. The same name Plato had given to the Athenian sage who first recorded the story of Atlantis after hearing it from Egyptian priests. If the inscription was authentic, it meant Lorenzo had not invented the legend. He had inherited it. Some modern historians argue that the signature was added later, a forgery meant to excite collectors. But others, including Halden himself, believed it was genuine. The old world spoke through him, Halden wrote in one of his later notes. He did not create the map. He remembered it. There are even accounts suggesting that Lorenzo's geometry wasn't entirely his own invention. Fragments of coded diagrams found in his journals appear to have been copied from sources he could not have accessed, including Egyptian temple engravings and Arabic cosmological manuscripts not translated until centuries later. The implication was extraordinary, that someone, somewhere, had provided him knowledge beyond his time. And yet, perhaps the strangest clue lies in a brief marginal note scrawled in faded ink on the map's lower edge. It reads simply, Custodite sigillum aquae, guard the seal of the water. No one has ever determined its meaning. Some say it refers to the ocean itself, the great seal that hides the ruins of Atlantis. Others believe it is a warning, an instruction not to disturb whatever lies beneath the waves. But a handful of esoteric scholars interpret it differently. To them, it is not about the ocean, but about memory, the seal that keeps humanity from remembering what it once knew. Whatever the truth, the cartographer's secret remains buried in that single phrase. Lorenzo di Rossi vanished, his workshop destroyed, his legacy erased. Yet his map endures, a silent witness to something far greater than a man's ambition. It whispers across centuries, calling to those who dare to see beyond the visible, to the world that waits beneath the water, still sealed, still dreaming. The story of Lorenzo di Rossi might have ended with the flames of the Venetian docks, a tragic tale of genius consumed by mystery, if not for what came centuries later. In 1922, while restoring the basement of an abandoned monastery near the Grand Canal, workers uncovered a series of sealed wooden crates, blackened by age and covered in the wax seals of the Serenissima Repubblica di Venezia. Inside were scrolls, manuscripts, and fragments of maritime charts, their edges burnt, their ink faded to a faint sepia. At first, the find was dismissed as debris from the Republic's extensive naval archives. But one crate bore a strange mark, an emblem of a compass encircled by 7 stars. Among the collection was a parchment containing a partial letter written in 16th century Italian, signed by none other than a Dominican friar, Bartolomeo di Santa Croce, the same name that appeared in Lorenzo's journals. The letter, now preserved in Venice's Biblioteca Marciana, began innocuously with a theological reflection, but soon took a darker tone. Bartolomeo wrote of a man touched by divine fire, whose pen draws not ink, but revelation. He warned his superiors that the chart he creates bears within it a curse of knowledge, for it reveals the earth as it was before the fall of man. The friar described how Lorenzo's map had caused unrest among scholars in the city, whispers of heresy, of forbidden sciences once taught by the ancients. Bartolomeo feared the church would act, that the Inquisition might see the geometry as an affront to divine order. His final words read, "If his work survives the purging flame, it must not fall into mortal hands, for within it lies the path to the drowned world." The letter's discovery sparked renewed interest in the lost archives of Venice, a shadow network of repositories said to contain forbidden documents, occult treatises, and political secrets too dangerous for open circulation. Historians have long known that the Venetian state maintained not just public archives, but hidden ones, the Archivio Segreto, guarded by a council of scholars and priests. Access required approval from the Doge himself, and even then, only under supervision. It was here, according to whispers, that the most dangerous works were sealed away. Texts on alchemy, geometry, and the so-called Atlantean diagrams believed to reveal the structure of divine creation. Over the years, fragments from these archives occasionally surfaced in strange ways, through auctions, private collections, or anonymous donations. Each piece hinted at something vast and buried. In 1931, a British naval historian named Charles Beaton acquired one such document. A torn vellum page showing a fragment of coastline labeled Terra Nova Incognita and marked with the same 7-star emblem found on the monastery crates. When examined under magnification, faint notes in the margin revealed coordinates that led not to any known island, but to a point in the mid-Atlantic, suspiciously close to the coordinates Professor Halden had identified decades earlier. Beaton's fascination became obsession. He spent years tracing Venetian trade routes, convinced that the Republic sailors had stumbled upon ancient ruins in the Atlantic long before Columbus. In a lecture at the Royal Geographical Society in 1934, he argued that Venice had secretly mapped a portion of the ocean using sources predating Christianity. His peers ridiculed him, but his theory caught the attention of a select few, among them a group of scholars who identified themselves only as custodes maris, the guardians of the sea. This group, according to surviving correspondence, believed that the Venetian archives had once held not only Lorenzo's map, but an entire codex, a collection of scrolls and diagrams copied from older civilizations. These, they claimed, were based on texts salvaged from Egyptian and Greek sources, describing a lost maritime empire that spanned the ocean between Europe and the Americas. They referred to it as the Thalassian Record, a phrase meaning of the sea. The codex, if real, would have been the earliest evidence of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact, perhaps even a remnant of the mythical Atlantis itself. During the Second World War, much of Venice's archival material was evacuated or destroyed. The custodes maris vanished without trace. Yet some believe they succeeded in smuggling a portion of the codex out of Italy. In 1946, a mysterious manuscript appeared in Cairo's antiquities market, written in a mix of Latin and archaic Greek, filled with geometric illustrations and maps of unknown origin. Its seller claimed it came from the drowned library of Venice. Though dismissed by most scholars as a forgery, a handful of historians noted that several symbols within the manuscript matched those found on Lorenzo's map, particularly a triangular glyph enclosing a circle, which reappears again and again across the parchment. Even more intriguing was a faint inscription along the bottom edge of one page, Redditus Admare, Return to the Sea. For decades, the authenticity of the Venice manuscripts remained disputed. Some argued they were elaborate hoaxes, fabricated by occultists seeking fame. Others saw them as fragments of genuine ancient knowledge, preserved by secret orders within the Republic. What cannot be denied, however, is that multiple independent finds, separated by centuries and geography, all point toward a single narrative: that Venice, the most powerful maritime city of the Renaissance, guarded the remnants of a far older oceanic civilization. In 1967, an Italian historian named Giulio Fenci published a controversial paper claiming that the layout of the Venetian city itself, its canals, plazas, and towers, mirrored the same geometric ratios found on Lorenzo's map. He proposed that the city had been deliberately designed to echo the pattern of the forbidden geometry, transforming Venice into a living diagram, a reflection of the lost continent beneath the sea. Fenci's work was dismissed by academics as pseudoscience. Yet years later, when satellite imaging of Venice was compared against Halden's reconstructed map, an uncanny symmetry emerged. Both aligned along the same 36-degree axis. Coincidence, perhaps, or a quiet legacy, a hidden tribute by architects who knew the secret and concealed it within stone and water. Today, access to the original Venetian archives remains tightly controlled. Many of the sealed crates from the monastery have since disappeared into private collections. But one document survives in the public record. A parchment fragment cataloged simply as Mappus 17C. On its edge, beneath smudges of ink and salt, appears a short Latin phrase written in an unfamiliar hand. Non est finus, sed initium. It means, this is not the end, but the beginning. And so the trail continues, from the burning docks of the 16th century to the damp vaults of modern Venice, from secret brotherhoods to lost manuscripts whispered of by men who vanished without explanation. The map, the codex, the geometry, all point to something more than myth. Somewhere beneath the layers of history, sealed beneath the waves, the archives of Venice may still guard the secret that connects the world we know to the one we've forgotten. By the mid-20th century, the map of Lorenzo di Rossi had become more than a relic. It was a riddle that refused to die. The names and coordinates it contained were too precise, its geometry too deliberate, and its symmetry with the Venetian archives too uncanny to ignore. But what if the truth it hinted at wasn't hidden in dusty manuscripts or secret libraries? What if it lay beneath the ocean itself? In 1969, a team of marine researchers from Portugal's Institute for Subaquatic Studies began a routine sonar survey off the coast of the Azores, a volcanic archipelago in the mid-Atlantic. What they recorded was not routine at all. Roughly 200 miles southwest of São Miguel, the sonar scanners revealed a rectangular plateau stretching nearly 60 kilometers across, an anomaly at a depth of about 2,000 meters. Its surface was unnaturally flat, interrupted by straight lines and right angles, as if shaped by human hands. The researchers initially assumed they had discovered a unique geological formation, perhaps a lava shelf carved by ancient volcanic eruptions. But one of the technicians, a young geologist named Manuel Ferreira, noticed something no one else had. The structure's coordinates matched the central point of the geometric grid described by Professor Halden decades earlier, the same location that served as the heart of Lorenzo's map. Ferreira brought his findings to the attention of his superiors, only to be met with skepticism. The idea of human-made ruins at such depths was dismissed outright. Still, the data troubled him. He spent months analyzing the sonar readouts, comparing them with oceanographic charts, until he became convinced that the formation was not a natural phenomenon. Its features were too precise, its symmetry too deliberate. In his private notes, he wrote, "These are not stones shaped by nature, but walls built by intelligence, a geometry beneath the waves." When he presented his theory at a Lisbon conference in 1970, he was quietly warned not to continue. The Institute issued a brief statement dismissing the discovery as a misinterpretation of natural basalt formations. The data was archived, Ferreira's research funding revoked, and his name faded from academic circles. But he never stopped investigating. In 1972, he purchased a small fishing trawler, modified it with sonar equipment, and returned to the same coordinates alone. What he found on that second voyage would never appear in any official report. According to fragments of his recovered journal, Ferreira's instruments recorded not only the same plateau, but what appeared to be a cluster of vertical structures rising from its surface. He described them as columns, massive and deliberate, like the skeleton of a forgotten city. In one entry, dated August 3rd, he wrote, "The sea sings here. My instruments hum when I cross the grid. There is something living in the silence below." That was the last entry. Ferreira's ship was found adrift 3 days later, its equipment intact, but he was gone. When news of his disappearance spread, the story briefly made Portuguese headlines. But almost immediately, it was overshadowed by political upheaval and quietly forgotten. Yet among oceanographers, the Ferreira anomaly became an urban legend, whispered about in university corridors and late-night symposiums. Some claimed he had discovered an ancient ruin and been silenced. Others insisted he had simply drowned in pursuit of obsession. The mystery might have faded entirely if not for what happened in 1986. During a deep-sea expedition funded by the European Oceanic Council, a team of French and Spanish researchers mapped portions of the mid-Atlantic ridge using newly developed side-scan sonar. When the data was compiled, the technicians noticed an unusual grid pattern in one of the sectors, a faint but repeating geometry beneath layers of sediment. The coordinates matched Ferreira's lost plateau. The official report dismissed it as an artifact of sonar interference. But an unredacted copy of the raw imaging data, leaked years later, revealed a structure shaped like a massive rectangle, with edges aligned almost perfectly to the cardinal directions. The resemblance to the geometry of Lorenzo's map was undeniable. Those who analyzed the leak noticed something else. Within the pattern were smaller shapes, circular depressions forming a spiral that mirrored the flower of life pattern identified by Halden. When projected onto the map, the alignment was exact. It was as though the seafloor itself had been carved to match the same sacred geometry once encoded by Renaissance hands. What could explain such a thing? Theories flooded the fringe academic circles. Some proposed that an ancient civilization had indeed existed in the Atlantic, technologically advanced, wiped out by a cataclysm. Others suggested that the geometry was a coincidence, a pattern our minds imposed on random data. But then came a discovery that neither science nor coincidence could easily explain. In 1997, researchers from the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, detected an ultra-low-frequency sound emanating from a region of the South Pacific, a powerful, rhythmic noise dubbed the bloop. Though initially believed to be caused by ice quakes, later analysis suggested it originated from something vast and organic, or mechanical. What went largely unreported, however, was that a similar frequency had been recorded years earlier, faintly echoing from the mid-Atlantic, the same region as Ferreira's plateau. When the two signals were compared, the resonance patterns were nearly identical. To some, this was coincidence. To others, it was confirmation that something ancient still stirred beneath the sea. Over the next decade, private expeditions, funded by wealthy patrons and anonymous foundations, attempted to explore the coordinates. Few made their findings public. One team, led by a reclusive ocean archaeologist named Dr. Corinne Villette, reportedly captured high-resolution scans showing symmetrical formations resembling colonnades. But soon after, Villette's vessel suffered a mysterious power failure, forcing the mission's abrupt end. The data was confiscated by the sponsoring corporation and never released. By now, the theory had evolved into a near-mythical narrative. Scholars, explorers, and mystics alike began to speak of the echo grid, a hidden network of geometric energy beneath the Atlantic, built by a civilization that understood the resonance between earth, sound, and geometry. They claimed that this civilization used harmonic frequencies to shape matter itself, leaving behind structures that still vibrate faintly beneath the waves. Whether such claims hold truth or madness, one thing is certain. The anomalies recorded beneath the Atlantic persist. Satellite gravimetry continues to detect density shifts inconsistent with natural geology. Deep-sea hydrophones still record inexplicable tones in the same frequency range as the ancient bloop. And every time these signals are triangulated, they converge again and again upon the same plateau first mapped by Ferreira, first drawn by Rossi, and first decoded by Halden. Perhaps it is all coincidence, a tapestry of misinterpretations and hopes stitched together by dreamers. Or perhaps, as some whisper, the ocean itself remembers. They say that when storms rage across the Atlantic and lightning strikes the waves, strange lights can sometimes be seen flickering beneath the surface. Pale, geometric glows, like reflections of a city that once was. Sailors call it the shimmer. Scientists call it bioluminescence. But the few who have seen it in silence say something else. They say it looks like the Earth remembering its own map. In a dim, candlelit chamber of the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, a man sits alone, hunched over a vast sheet of vellum stretched tight across his table. His fingers are stained with ink, his eyes red from sleepless nights. This man is Bartolomeo Pareto, a mapmaker, a mathematician, a man once celebrated for his skill and precision. But tonight, his work is not meant for royal eyes or navigators. What he sketches now is forbidden knowledge, a coastline that should not exist. The year is 1513, and on his desk lies a secret so ancient that it defies every law of geography known to his age. Pareto's quill moves with reverence, as though copying something sacred rather than creating anew. He pauses often, consulting a pile of old parchments, translations of even older Greek texts, some rumored to come from a library long destroyed. There are fragments of Ptolemy, whispers of Plato, and strange, undeciphered notations believed to originate from Moorish astronomers. Yet among these relics lies something else, a small, crumbling sketch labeled in faint ink, Antilia, the island beyond the ocean. To any scholar, this word would mean myth. But to Pareto, it is a clue. For weeks, he has been comparing this strange island shape with patterns of trade winds, early sailor logs, and ancient maps smuggled from Constantinople after the fall. The lines are inconsistent, yet something stirs him, the uncanny alignment between the so-called Antilia and the submerged plateau west of Gibraltar. Could it be that the legends were not falsehoods, but misremembered truths? Could Plato's Atlantis have been charted long before the modern age? Outside, Florence hums with the noise of merchants and poets, of artisans and preachers. The Renaissance burns brightly, an age of rediscovery. Yet within this rebirth, Pareto's obsession isolates him. His colleagues mock him for chasing myths. His patron, a Florentine duke, warns him that the church frowns upon such blasphemous curiosities. Still, the cartographer continues. Because in the depths of those forbidden sketches, he has begun to see something no one else dares to. Mathematical precision, coastlines that match not imagination, but reality. He recalls an encounter years earlier with an Ottoman navigator in Venice, a man who had whispered of an ancient map hidden in Topkapi Palace, drawn by sailors who sailed where no Christian dared. That map, he said, showed the true outline of the world before the flood. Pareto had dismissed it as superstition, but now those words haunt him. Could the Ottomans have preserved knowledge lost to Europe, a geography from an age when the world itself was different? The further he digs, the stranger his findings become. Some of the coastlines he copies seem to correspond not to the modern world, but to what the land masses would have looked like if sea levels were drastically lower. Mountains appear where oceans should be, rivers cut through what are now desert plains. And at the center of it all, like a ghost, lies a vast, ring-shaped island, a shape eerily similar to Plato's description of Atlantis. Concentric rings of land and water, surrounded by a boundless ocean. He becomes consumed. Days turn to nights, nights to weeks. Servants say he murmurs in his sleep, muttering names in Greek and Latin. He speaks of lost stars and sunken meridians. His workshop fills with scrolls and astrolabes, and on one table sits a compass that refuses to point north. A relic he claims was found in an old Moorish vault, its magnetic pull drawn not to the pole, but to something deep beneath the Atlantic. Then, one evening, a knock at the door breaks his trance. Two men, cloaked in the red and black insignia of the Medici order, deliver a sealed letter. It bears the mark of the Duke himself. The message is clear. Your work has drawn attention. Cease your inquiries, or the Inquisition will do it for you. Pareto's hand trembles. He knows what that means. Scholars have vanished for less. He burns his notes that night, or so the witnesses later say. But the truth is stranger. Before the flames consume his manuscripts, Pareto copies one final version of his mysterious world map. He folds it carefully, concealing it behind the lining of a wooden case, one that would later pass into the archives of a lesser-known Venetian merchant family. That case, centuries later, would resurface in fragments, its contents mislabeled and nearly forgotten. But the faint ink of Pareto's lines would still be visible, the phantom outline of a land that should not exist. In the morning, Pareto is gone. Some claim he fled Florence for the East. Others whisper he was taken by night. His name soon disappears from records, erased as though he never lived. But his map, or rather, the legend of it, spreads like smoke among scholars and sailors. By the time cartographers like Pierre Rees begin charting their astonishingly accurate world maps, whispers arise that they drew inspiration from lost Renaissance sources. And so, the forgotten cartographer becomes the silent link between myth and history. His unseen hand may have guided those who dared to map the world beyond the horizon. The story of Atlantis, once dismissed as allegory, now lingers in his lines, coded into coastlines and ocean depths. And as centuries pass, Pareto's secret fades into obscurity, buried beneath the triumph of science and the pride of nations. Yet even now, when historians examine the surviving fragments of those early maps, they find anomalies, coastlines drawn centuries before their discovery, lands depicted before they were ever charted. Some dismiss them as coincidences. Others see the shadow of a forgotten source, an ancient memory passed through hands like Pareto's. Perhaps that is the cartographer's true secret, that the world remembers more than we think. And sometimes, ink and myth become the same thing, maps of a reality the earth itself has tried to erase. The rain fell steadily over Venice that night, turning the narrow canals into sheets of silver. Lanterns swayed above the water, their reflections trembling like restless ghosts. Deep inside the labyrinth of alleys near the Rialto, an aging scholar named Lorenzo Vitali moved quickly beneath his cloak, clutching a small parcel close to his chest. He had spent decades working among the archives of forgotten families, cataloging letters, trade records, and wills that no one else cared to read. Yet tonight, his footsteps carried urgency, because what he held might not belong to history at all. The parcel contained a map. Not a full one, just a fragment. A torn corner of thick, ancient vellum. Its ink faded, but its lines unervingly precise. It had been found hidden in the false bottom of a chest from the late 1500s, mislabeled as household correspondence. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but Lorenzo's trained eye saw something that chilled him. The fragment showed a portion of a coastline, one that did not match any known continent. And beneath it, written in a hand both elegant and archaic, were the words, Terra Memorata, the remembered land. That night, Lorenzo laid the fragment flat beneath the glow of a single oil lamp. The texture of the vellum was unmistakably Renaissance era, but the design, the style of the strokes, the curvature of the latitudinal lines, it suggested something older, much older. When he examined the pigments under magnification, he found traces of mineral compounds used only in the early 1500s, the same found in Florentine inks. But something was wrong. The scale was impossible. It showed land where only ocean should be. Days turned into weeks. Lorenzo quietly withdrew from his duties, immersing himself in this mystery. His apartment soon became a fortress of parchment and dust, every surface covered in old nautical charts, astronomical diagrams, and fragments of Latin manuscripts he believed might connect to the fragment. The more he compared them, the clearer one idea became. This piece belonged to something far greater, perhaps one of the lost maps rumored to have vanished from Florence after the Inquisition purged pagan sciences. One name appeared again and again in the margins of letters he examined. Pareto, the mysterious mapmaker from Florence, whose final years were shrouded in secrecy. Lorenzo remembered reading about him in passing, a brilliant cartographer who disappeared after accusations of heresy. Now, with the fragment before him, the possibility struck like lightning. Could this be a surviving piece of Pareto's forbidden map? His search led him deeper into Venice's underbelly of collectors and smugglers, men who dealt in manuscripts the church preferred forgotten. One evening, he met a trader who claimed to possess something related to the lost geography. The man, nervous and pale, unwrapped a parchment covered in symbols and circles, a strange fusion of astronomy and geometry. In its corner was a faint signature, B.P. Lorenzo's breath caught. Bartolomeo Pareto. But before he could acquire it, the trader hesitated. It is said this drawing came from the Archivio Nascosto, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. The hidden archive, beneath San Giovanni e Paolo. You don't find it. It finds you. The words lingered in Lorenzo's mind. The Archivio Nascosto, long dismissed as myth, a secret collection of heretical works preserved by rogue monks during the Counter-Reformation. Legends said it contained banned cosmologies, suppressed maps, even early scientific works deemed too dangerous. Over the following weeks, Lorenzo followed every rumor. He bribed old archivists, combed through parish registries, and traced forgotten tunnels beneath the city. Then, one stormy evening, his persistence paid off. An aging friar from the Dominican order agreed to meet him in a secluded chapel. The friar's eyes were pale, his hands trembling, but his words were clear. "What you seek lies below," he said, pointing to a stone hatch covered by centuries of dust. With a lantern in one hand and the fragment tucked safely inside his coat, Lorenzo descended into the earth. The air grew colder with every step. The tunnels twisted beneath the church like veins beneath skin. Then he reached it, a low chamber lined with shells of decaying parchment, scrolls sealed in wax. and chests inscribed with names long erased from history. He found maps, they're unlike anything in Europe, charts showing the coasts of Antarctica without ice, the outlines of continents that no European should have known existed. Some bore strange, circular patterns that matched Plato's description of Atlantis' concentric rings. Others contained annotations in Arabic, Greek, and even Phoenician. These were not mere records of discovery. They were records of memory, echoes of a world that had perished long before history began. And among them, he found it, a complete version of Pareto's world map. It was breathtaking. The ink shimmered faintly under the lantern light, its lines so fine they seemed to move. Across the Atlantic, west of the Pillars of Hercules, lay a vast island divided into 3 rings, exactly as Plato described. Around it were strange notations: Helike, Inie, Poseidonia, names that seemed both familiar and impossible. But before he could copy it, a sound echoed through the tunnels: footsteps. The friar who guided him was gone. Shadows flickered at the far end of the corridor. A voice called out his name, distorted by stone. Lorenzo's pulse quickened. He gathered what he could: the fragment, a small sketch of the larger map, and the lamp, and fled into the winding dark. When he emerged into the night air, drenched and trembling, the storm had broken. He never returned to that chapel, nor did he speak again of what he saw. Within a week, he was found dead in his apartment, cause of death unknown. The fragment vanished from the Venetian archives shortly after. Some say it was seized by the Inquisition, others that it was smuggled to Constantinople. Yet the whispers persisted. A map that showed the world before the flood. A hidden archive beneath the city of canals. A forgotten connection between Renaissance knowledge and an ancient civilization lost beneath the waves. And though the world moved on, those who studied the history of cartography would, from time to time, stumble upon references to the remembered land. Always in passing, always vague, but enough to keep the question alive. What if somewhere, beneath centuries of dust and dogma, the truth about Atlantis still waits, inked on vellum, sealed away, waiting to be found again? The story of Atlantis has always been told through myth, but what if its secret was hidden not in words, but in numbers, angles, and lines? The deeper researchers looked into the recovered fragments from Venice, the clearer it became. Pareto's and other Renaissance maps weren't just artistic renderings of coastlines. They were coded. Every curve, every latitude, every ratio between ocean and land hinted at something else, a cipher written in geometry. Dr. Elias Romero, a cryptographer from Lisbon, was the first to suggest that the so-called Atlantean fragments followed a hidden mathematical sequence. In 2003, while studying high-resolution scans of early Renaissance world maps, he noticed something strange. The distance ratios between key points, the Azores, the Canary Islands, and a series of phantom landmasses that no longer exist, corresponded exactly to the ratios found in ancient Greek harmonic theory, the same proportions used in Pythagoras' scale of music. The conclusion chilled him. These cartographers were not just mapping geography. They were mapping harmony, a kind of planetary music, as if the earth itself once sang. This idea might sound poetic, even absurd, but as Romero dug deeper, he discovered that some of the oldest maps encoded hidden symmetries, coordinates arranged to form geometric patterns when connected by line. Circles, triangles, even a perfect hexagon overlaid across the Atlantic. He called it the cipher of the sea. What if, he proposed, the Renaissance cartographers had inherited fragments of a much older geodetic system, one that measured not distance, but resonance? To understand this, he turned to Plato's Timaeus and Critias. In those dialogues, Atlantis was said to be a perfect circle divided by divine measure. its geometry mirroring the order of the cosmos. Most dismissed this as allegory, but Romero asked a different question. What if Plato's divine measure was literal? What if Atlantis had been built and mapped according to a harmonic code that once guided entire civilizations? Romero's theory gained traction among a quiet group of researchers, mathematicians, geographers, and independent historians. They began re-examining ancient structures worldwide: the pyramids, Stonehenge, Nabta Playa, Machu Picchu. Many of these sites, they found, shared alignments to celestial patterns and oceanic distances. When these alignments were converted into ratios, they matched the same mathematical constants found in Pareto's map. Coincidence, perhaps, but there were too many coincidences. In one of the Venetian fragments Lorenzo had copied before his death, the concentric rings of a circular island were surrounded by inscriptions written in ciphered Latin. For decades, scholars dismissed them as decorative. But Romero, using digital enhancement, discovered something extraordinary. The inscriptions were coordinates, but not for a single place. When plotted on a globe, they formed a network of points stretching from the Azores to West Africa to Antarctica, all lying along the same longitudinal resonance line. He presented his findings at a small academic symposium in Geneva. Most attendees scoffed. Atlantis, one archaeologist muttered, belongs in Plato, not in math. But a few listened. Among them was Dr. Amara Kuhn, a German marine geologist specializing in ocean floor magnetics. She approached Romero after his talk, intrigued. "You may be right," she told him quietly. "There's something under the mid-Atlantic ridge that resonates with your data. We've measured anomalies there, rhythmic, repeating magnetic pulses. Not natural, structured." Over the next 2 years, Romero and Kuhn collaborated in secret. They used satellite magnetometry data to map subtle distortions in the Atlantic crust, lines that pulsed like veins of energy across the seabed. When these were overlaid with Pareto's geometries, the result was staggering. The anomalies matched the exact pattern of the supposed Atlantean rings. It was as if the lost city had left a fingerprint beneath the ocean floor, not as ruins, but as an electromagnetic echo. Still, there was a problem. No peer-reviewed journal would publish such a claim. Funding was quietly withdrawn. And then, Kuhn's research facility suffered a mysterious data wipe. Years of oceanic readings deleted overnight. When she confronted the administration, she was told it was a technical malfunction. But the hard drives were physically destroyed, their backups missing. Romero began receiving anonymous emails, cryptic messages referencing the archives of Sagres and the key within the meridian. At first, he ignored them. Then, a small envelope arrived at his office in Lisbon. Inside was a photocopy of a 16th century manuscript attributed to the Portuguese navigator Diogo Ribeiro. It contained a sketch nearly identical to Pareto's, and on the back, a series of numbers written in a tight, slanted hand. When decoded, they matched the same resonance ratios Romero had discovered. It was as though a hidden network of cartographers across Europe had been communicating through mathematics. A brotherhood of mapmakers who knew something about the Earth's past that modern science had forgotten. A geometry too dangerous to name. Romero called the code's key the harmonic meridian, a line that, according to his calculations, passed directly through the ancient site of Gades, modern Cadiz, and extended westward into the deep Atlantic. The mapmakers, he wrote, were not guessing at Atlantis. They were marking the meridian of memory, the axis of a world erased. But his discovery drew attention. Strange men began attending his lectures, never taking notes. One evening, returning to his flat, he found his door slightly ajar. Inside, his computer had been taken, his notes scattered. Only one thing remained untouched: the photocopy of Ribeiro's map, still pinned beneath a magnet on the refrigerator. It felt deliberate, like a warning. Romero fled to the Azores, believing the islands to be remnants of the Atlantean highlands. There, he continued his research in isolation, communicating with Kuhn through encrypted messages. She had begun planning an expedition to the coordinates he'd derived, deep below the Sargasso Sea, where magnetic distortions were strongest. "If your cipher is right," she wrote, "the sea itself may be guarding something." But before the expedition could begin, Kuhn vanished during a research trip near the Canary Basin. Her last known message to Romero contained just 4 words: "The meridian is real." No trace of her vessel was ever found. And yet, weeks later, Romero received another envelope, unmarked, with no return address. Inside was a data chip. When he decrypted it, he found a single image: a sonar scan of the Atlantic seabed showing a near-perfect circular formation, 15 kilometers wide, buried beneath layers of sediment. It was shaped like a ring, divided precisely by the same harmonic ratios inscribed on Pareto's lost map. Romero never spoke publicly again, but his notes, leaked years later, contained one haunting line that seems to echo the voice of centuries past. "Atlantis is not lost. It is encrypted in the Earth's design. The sea remembers what man has forgotten." The bells of Rome tolled slowly over the Tiber, their echoes drifting through narrow streets lined with marble saints. It was the spring of 1539, the dawn of a new age, or so the scholars claimed. But inside the Vatican's shadowed halls, something very old was being buried. Behind thick doors, in the dim light of the Archivio Segreto, a council of cardinals gathered around a table covered in parchment, wax seals, and forbidden maps. The discussion was quiet, but the decision would echo for centuries. What must be done with the Geographia Heretica, the heretical maps? At the head of the table sat Cardinal Benedetto Carafa, a man whose face was carved by austerity. He had once been a patron of scholars, but after the growing influence of Copernican thought and whispers of hidden lands beyond the known world, his tone had hardened. The Church was at war, not with armies, but with ideas. And among the most dangerous of these ideas was one that dared to challenge Genesis itself: that before Adam, before Eden, there had been another world, one wiped clean by divine wrath. Atlantis. Carafa lifted a map drawn in fine Florentine ink. It showed a circular landmass beyond the Pillars of Hercules, annotated with strange Greek words: Poseidonia, Helike, Metropolis. The map bore the same ratios found in Pareto's lost work. It had been seized from the personal collection of a Dominican scholar accused of pagan sympathies. The cardinal frowned. "This," he said, "is not geography. It is blasphemy disguised as science." But one voice dared to object. Father Matteo Orsini, a Jesuit astronomer, rose from his seat. "Your Eminence," he said quietly, "if these maps are indeed false, then why do their coordinates match our own star charts? Why do their meridians align perfectly with the old Alexandrian models? If deception, it is one of divine complexity." Carafa's gaze hardened. "You would have us believe that Plato's myth holds truth? That God permitted another world before this one?" Orsini hesitated, his eyes flickering to the parchment. "I believe, perhaps, that truth is older than Scripture." The silence that followed was heavy. 2 guards stepped forward at the cardinal's signal. Orsini was removed from the chamber, never to be seen again. The following morning, the Church issued a decree. All cartographic materials suggesting pre-Diluvian civilizations or non-biblical histories were to be confiscated and sealed. This order, signed and stamped with papal authority, would later become known to historians as the Occultus Terrae Tabulus, on the hidden maps of the earth. Under this decree, hundreds of manuscripts vanished. Collections in Florence, Venice, and Toledo were raided. The works of Pareto, Ribeiro, and other cartographers were seized for preservation, though none would ever resurface. Many scholars simply disappeared, their names struck from records, their families silenced by fear. In the years that followed, the Vatican's secret archive swelled. Within its stone chambers, deep beneath St. Peter's Basilica, the forbidden maps were catalogued and locked away in sealed drawers. A few clerics, tasked with studying them under oath of silence, reported strange consistencies, coastlines that mirrored underwater ridges, annotations that predicted magnetic variations centuries before they were discovered. Some began to suspect that these maps were fragments of a single, ancient source, perhaps copied again and again through ages, passed from one civilization to the next. But such whispers could not be tolerated. By 1555, the Inquisition expanded its reach to scholars of cosmography, astronomy, and mathematics. Owning certain maps became grounds for heresy. Copies were burned in public squares alongside pagan works of philosophy. Yet rumors persisted that not all had been destroyed. Some claimed that sympathetic monks smuggled fragments out of Rome, hiding them in abbeys across Europe. One legend spoke of a Jesuit vault in Avignon, another of an encrypted library hidden within the walls of the Escorial in Spain. Centuries later, when Napoleon's forces invaded Italy, his officers ransacked parts of the Vatican Library. Among the confiscated papers listed in the 1809 inventory were unidentified charts of the antediluvian world. The description vanished from subsequent records. Modern archivists insist such documents never existed. And yet, a faint notation survives in a private letter from a French officer to his superior. The church hides what the sea remembers. The old maps speak of lands drowned before time. For those who believe the suppression was real, the motive seems clear. If Atlantis had once existed, a civilization older than Scripture, destroyed not by sin, but by cataclysm, it would threaten the theological foundation of divine creation. The Church could not allow the world to imagine a pre-Edenic humanity, a wisdom greater than its own doctrine. So it erased the evidence, or tried to. In the 20th century, researchers who gained limited access to the Vatican's sealed cartographic section reported something curious. Several drawers labeled Mappe Antediluviani were listed in the catalog, but found empty. Others contained copies so faded they were unreadable. The official explanation was deterioration. But one former archivist, interviewed anonymously in 1972, told a different story. They were not destroyed. They were relocated. Some maps were sent to monasteries under new seals. Others left Italy altogether. When asked why, the archivist smiled faintly. Because knowledge, like faith, can never be truly contained. It only changes its hiding place. Today, Vatican scholars neither confirm nor deny the existence of such documents. The Archivio Segreto remains one of the most restricted repositories on Earth, its walls lined with mysteries older than most nations. Access requires both papal permission and silence. Yet the rumors refuse to die. Some say that deep within its labyrinthine corridors lies a map etched not on parchment, but on copper, a relic from civilization so ancient it predates written history. It is said to bear a single Latin inscription, ex aqua nati, ex aqua perditae, born of water, perish by water. Others claim that a coded cross-reference within the Vatican archives leads to a missing Greek manuscript attributed to Crantor, Plato's student, which directly quotes Egyptian priests describing the Western Isle that sank. No scholar has ever seen it. But if even a fraction of these rumors are true, then the Church's centuries-long suppression was not mere censorship. It was containment, an effort to keep humanity from peering too far backward, lest it find itself staring into an abyss of forgotten truth. And somewhere in those sealed rooms beneath the marble floors of the Holy See, the hidden maps of the earth may still lie, their ink faded, but their geometry intact, waiting for the day when silence is no longer stronger than the sea. In the shadowed corridors of Florence during the height of the Renaissance, a quiet revolution was unfolding, one not of art or sculpture, but of maps. Behind the shimmering facade of the Medici family's patronage and wealth lay a secret obsession, the creation of maps that might reveal more than the world itself. In the flickering light of oil lamps, scholars, priests, and exiled sailors whispered of coastlines that appeared on parchment centuries before any explorer's ship had ever touched them. These were not ordinary cartographers. They were the hidden map-makers of the Medici, men who dared to chart myths, prophecies, and forbidden knowledge. In the private library of Cosimo de' Medici, among shelves heavy with codices and ancient manuscripts, there existed a secret collection known only to a few, the Tavole Perdute, or the Lost Tables. These documents, it was said, contained fragments of ancient geography, pieces of the world as it was before the flood. One parchment in particular stirred both wonder and fear, a faded chart showing a vast landmass below the equator, drawn centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered. Its name was smudged, but in the margin, someone had written a single haunting word, Atlantis. This strange connection between classical legend and Renaissance science fascinated Cosimo. He commissioned his most trusted scholar, Paolo dal Pozzo Toscanelli, to study the document in secret. Toscanelli, known for his brilliant mind and careful hands, was already obsessed with the idea of unknown continents. He believed that the ancient world had possessed maps of extraordinary precision, maps now lost or hidden by time and politics. To him, this fragment was not myth but memory. He began cross-referencing it with the ancient works of Strabo, Ptolemy, and Plato, convinced that somewhere beneath layers of poetic language and allegory lay a real geography. As word of Toscanelli's work spread quietly through Florence's intellectual circles, others became involved. Among them, young artists like Leonardo da Vinci, whose curiosity for proportion, mathematics, and the curvature of the earth led him often into the Medici archives. Leonardo once sketched a mysterious circular map, different from any known projection of the time, where an island lay halfway between Europe and the Western Ocean. He labeled it not by name, but by a symbol, a trident emerging from the sea. Was it an artistic flourish, or a hidden acknowledgement of Atlantis' mythic ruler? Historians still argue, but the timing is telling. Toscanelli's secret correspondence with explorers added yet another layer to the enigma. In letters preserved only in fragments, he describes his belief that the ancient world had once been global, that knowledge of far-off lands had circulated long before Europe's so-called Age of Discovery. He sent one such letter to a Portuguese navigator, urging him to sail west rather than south. The navigator's name was Christopher Columbus. Centuries later, scholars would find that Columbus carried Toscanelli's map, a version eerily similar to those rumored Medici charts, on his first voyage across the Atlantic. Whether by coincidence or design, the map that guided him may have been inspired by a document connected to Atlantis itself. But within a Medici household, not everyone approved of these pursuits. The Church, increasingly wary of pagan and heretical knowledge, had begun to monitor Florence's scholars. The blending of biblical creation with ancient myth was dangerous. When a Dominican friar discovered that Toscanelli's group was discussing Atlantis as a possible pre-flood civilization, he accused them of mathematical sorcery, the practice of seeking divine secrets through geometry. In fear, several manuscripts were hidden away. Some vanished. Others, curiously, reappeared years later in the possession of a secretive society that would come to be known as the Accademia degli Arcani, the Academy of the Hidden. In the decades that followed, the Medici continued to fund cartographic research, but much of it was cloaked in symbolism. Maps became less about navigation and more about philosophy, about man's place in the cosmos. Yet beneath this artful disguise, hints of the old obsession remained. Even in the great frescoes of the Palazzo Vecchio, scholars have found faint coastlines painted in gold leaf, outlines that resemble the sunken patterns of Plato's fabled island. To the Medici, knowledge was power, and maps were its most potent symbol. A map could define empires, rewrite theology, even challenge God's order by implying the world was older, larger, and stranger than the Church admitted. For some, the secret of Atlantis was not about a lost city, but about the origin of knowledge itself. The question of where humanity's first maps, sciences, and languages truly came from. The Medici, with their wealth and reach, stood at the crossroads of myth and modernity, quietly preserving what others sought to erase. As Toscanelli grew old, he refused to destroy the documents entrusted to him. Instead, he sealed them in a leather chest and left them in the care of a young apprentice who later vanished from historical record. That chest, many believe, was passed through generations of Florentine families, surfacing briefly in the 17th century before disappearing again. Some claim it lies buried beneath the Medici Chapel. Others say it was taken to the Vatican's secret archives during the Counter-Reformation. Yet even today, whispers persist among historians and collectors. Every so often, a fragment surfaces, a map, a note, a drawing, all pointing to a forgotten cartographic lineage that predates known exploration. The Medici may have been more than patrons of art. They might have been guardians of secret geography, one that could prove Atlantis was not just a myth, but a memory of a world long before our own. And if that's true, then somewhere in the shadows of Florence's past lies a truth so profound, it could redraw the map of history itself. In the candlelit workshops of Renaissance Europe, cartography was more than a science. It was an act of faith, imagination, and sometimes rebellion. The maps that adorned the walls of scholars and nobles were not just tools for navigation. They were coded stories, veiled in artistry and myth. Beneath their elegant compass roses, beneath the sea monsters that prowled along imagined coastlines, there existed a language of symbols, one that only a few could truly read. And among these symbols, buried like whispers on vellum, were clues that suggested the mapmakers of the Renaissance might have known something the rest of the world had forgotten. The late 15th century was a time of furious curiosity. Explorers returned from the edges of the known world with tales of lands that defied all reason, and artists transformed those stories into breathtaking illustrations of a universe reborn. Yet, as the age of discovery flourished, some mapmakers began to include shapes and emblems that didn't belong. They depicted impossible islands, coastlines that would not be confirmed for centuries, and, most curious of all, geometric patterns hidden within the very layout of their maps. These weren't mistakes. They were messages. One of the most enigmatic examples is the From Maro map, created around 1450 in Venice. On its surface, it appears to be a masterpiece of medieval geography. but when studied closely, its symbols tell another story. Along the southern oceans, from Morrow drew faint circular forms, spiraling like concentric rings, the same structure Plato described for Atlantis. Around them, cryptic Latin annotations reference lands destroyed by divine waters. Scholars dismissed these details as allegory, but others saw in them a deliberate code, a way of embedding forbidden ideas within a work that the Church could not condemn. Renaissance cartographers often had to hide their truths. Many were connected to secret societies, philosophical orders, or esoteric brotherhoods that sought to preserve ancient wisdom. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, is one of the most haunting examples of this hidden legacy. Discovered centuries later in Istanbul, it shows the coastlines of South America and what appears to be Antarctica without its ice cap. The precision is so advanced that modern cartographers remain baffled. How could a 16th century sailor have drawn something that would not be accurately charted until the 20th century? Some argue that Piri Reis had access to older source maps, ancient pre-flood charts of the Earth's surface passed down through hidden archives. In his own notes, Piri Reis claims he compiled his map using 20 charts and Mappe Mundi, some of which were said to date back to the time of Alexander the Great. Among Renaissance scholars, the blending of knowledge and secrecy became an art in itself. Mapmakers used mythological figures to mask geography, symbols to conceal coordinates, and allegory to express forbidden truths. The trident, symbol of Poseidon and ruler of Atlantis, appears repeatedly, carved into the corners of globes, hidden within compass roses, or disguised as decorative flourishes. The image of three-pronged balance, land, water, and heaven, was a favored motif among those who believed the Earth's geography echoed divine order. In Florence, a mysterious group of cartographers known as the Circle of Mercury supposedly met in secret to share knowledge inherited from ancient manuscripts. Their maps, rare and half-forgotten, combined celestial charts with earthly ones, as though they believed that the positions of stars could mirror the shape of continents. One surviving document from this circle, the Cosmographia Celestis, shows an astonishing symmetry between the constellations and the layout of the Atlantic Ocean. In the place where Plato said Atlantis once stood, the stars form a mirrored pattern of concentric rings, a perfect reflection, as if heaven itself remembered what Earth had lost. Art and cartography were intertwined during this period. Painters like Botticelli, da Vinci, and even Raphael embedded cosmological symbolism in their works. Botticelli's Birth of Venus, for instance, has long been studied for its mythological beauty, but some researchers suggest the seashell on which Venus stands resembles the spiral rings of Atlantis. The Renaissance mind saw no distinction between art and truth. To them, beauty was a vessel for knowledge. So perhaps, through color and form, they were painting the geography of memory, the remnants of a world that once existed. Not everyone saw these symbols as harmless. The Church began to fear that mapmakers were encoding heresy into their works. The Inquisition scrutinized maps for signs of pagan influence, especially when inscriptions mentioned the flood or lands of the old gods. One cartographer, Henricus Martellus, was rumored to have destroyed a series of maps depicting a great western island. When he died in 1496, his studio was raided, and his remaining works vanished into private collections. Yet, centuries later, fragments of Martellus's maps were discovered hidden inside the bindings of other books, reused parchment showing faint coastlines where none should have been. It wasn't only the Church that wanted such symbols buried. Monarchs, too, feared what these hidden geographies could mean. A map that hinted at lost lands implied that divine authority might not control the boundaries of the earth. Power, after all, depended on discovery, and discovery depended on secrets. For every chart that reached a royal court, there were others that disappeared, copied in silence by candlelight, traded in whispers between scholars who valued truth over obedience. Even today, digital scans of ancient maps reveal markings invisible to the naked eye. Modern researchers using multispectral imaging have uncovered faint diagrams beneath centuries of dust, spirals, triangles, and celestial alignments, all positioned with mathematical precision. These are not random embellishments. They seem to encode messages about direction, latitude, and geometry, symbols that may point to a location once known to ancient navigators. If these findings are true, then the Renaissance cartographers were not inventing myth. They were preserving fragments of an ancient science. The deeper one studies these maps, the more it feels as though they are not depictions of the world as it was, but as it used to be. A world that existed before cataclysm, before time buried memory beneath oceans. The symbols, tridents, spirals, golden ratios, concentric rings, might not just be decoration, but remembrance. And so, when a Renaissance mapmaker inked a dragon across an uncharted sea, perhaps it wasn't only to warn sailors of danger. Perhaps it was to whisper a truth they could not write aloud. Here lies what once was. Here lies what we lost. The symbols were never meant to be read by all. They were messages to the future, fragments of a forgotten language left for those bold enough to search beneath the surface of the known world. And if one follows them carefully enough, tracing the invisible lines across centuries of ink and silence, they all seem to converge on the same place, a place the ancients called Atlantis. In the glittering courts and candlelit workshops of Renaissance Europe, cartographers were celebrated as visionaries, men who stitched the world together through lines of ink and imagination. But among their ranks were a few who disappeared without a trace, their maps confiscated, their names erased, their legacies reduced to whispers in dusty archives. To the church and the crowned heads of Europe, these men had crossed an invisible line. They had begun to map the forbidden. And for that, they paid with silence. The first recorded disappearance occurred in 1499. A Venetian mapmaker named Andrea di Benvenuto presented a remarkable chart to a group of scholars. The map, drawn on fine vellum and gilded at its corners, depicted the Atlantic with uncanny accuracy, including a large, circular island halfway between Europe and the Americas. Its shape mirrored the precise concentric rings described in Plato's Timaeus. Witnesses described Andrea as pale, trembling, yet certain when he spoke of the island as a remnant of a world before the flood. Within weeks, his workshop was raided by the Council of Ten, his assistants questioned, and his maps seized for correction. Andrea himself was never seen again. Officially, his death was attributed to fever, but his apprentice, Matteo Rossi, left behind a cryptic note before vanishing years later. The map was true. The world hides more than the church allows. Across Europe, similar stories emerged. In Lisbon, an anonymous navigator reportedly created a chart of the drowned lands based on fragments from Phoenician tablets. In Florence, a scholar working under the Medici was accused of drawing the garden of the gods upon the face of the earth. He too vanished. Records from 1512 mention his possessions being sealed and transported to the Roman collection for review. That phrase, "for review," appears repeatedly in Inquisition documents. It was code for confiscation, a bureaucratic burial of forbidden knowledge. Why did these cartographers risk everything? What compelled them to keep drawing what others insisted was myth? Many historians believe they were part of a quiet network, a hidden fellowship of scholars who traded ancient fragments, charts, and oral traditions that stretched back to Alexandria. To them, mapping was not only geography, it was resurrection. Each coastline, each curve of ink, was an attempt to bring back something the world had chosen to forget. The Renaissance was a time of rediscovery, but also of censorship. The printing press could spread knowledge faster than ever before, but the church sought to control what knowledge was allowed to spread. Geography, like theology, had boundaries. To map unknown worlds was to question divine order. And so, those who dared to place Atlantis on parchment, even as allegory, were deemed heretics, not for defying faith, but for suggesting that civilization itself might predate the Bible's timeline. Among the most haunting of these lost figures is Johannes Schonner, a German polymath whose globes contained curious anomalies. His 1515 globe shows a southern continent, detailed with mountain ranges and rivers, centuries before Antarctica was officially discovered. Later versions of his work were altered, the mysterious land reduced or erased altogether. Schonner's personal notes, found long after his death, include a cryptic line. From the maps of those who came before, we see the world as it once was, not as it is. Even more unsettling is the fate of an obscure French mapmaker, Pierre de Lisle, whose 16th century chart described a great western isle beyond the Azores. His writings reveal an obsession with flood myths from multiple cultures, Babylonian, Egyptian, and Greek, which he believed were memories of a real cataclysm. In 1533, after presenting his theories to the University of Paris, de Lisle was denounced for geographical blasphemy. His manuscripts were burned, and he was imprisoned for propagating false antiquities. When he was released years later, he was a broken man. He lived the rest of his life in silence, sketching spirals and concentric circles in the margins of old books until the day he died. And yet, despite every attempt to erase them, fragments of their forbidden maps keep resurfacing. In private collections, beneath layers of newer ink, restorers have discovered ghostly outlines of unknown coastlines. Some scholars call these phantom geographies, traces of erased lands that refuse to stay buried. Others see them as proof that these vanished cartographers had glimpsed something real, something once known and deliberately concealed. A rare manuscript known as Codex Imago Mundi, discovered in Prague in 1894, contains several anonymous maps showing the Atlantic with strange annotations. The place where the sun first rose, the drowned libraries, the island of 10 kings. Its style matches that of early Renaissance cartographers, yet no name appears on it. The parchment bears watermarks from Florence, but its symbols include emblems used by Portuguese navigators, suggesting a collaboration across borders, united by secrecy. Modern historians often dismiss these men as dreamers who blurred myth with science. But their precision tells another story. Many of their supposed errors match geological features confirmed centuries later: submerged plateaus, undersea ridges, and continental outlines visible only today through sonar mapping. How could Renaissance scholars have drawn what they could not possibly have seen? One chilling theory persists: that these cartographers had access to ancient source maps copied from civilizations long lost to time, maps inherited from a pre-flood world. If true, then their disappearances were not coincidence. They were warnings. For those in power, knowledge was the most dangerous form of rebellion. A map that redrew the world could unmake the order of heaven and earth. So the cartographers were silenced, their works sealed away in the Vatican, the Escorial, and private royal collections. Their families were told to forget, and history obeyed. Yet every so often, one of their names resurfaces, a forgotten entry in a ledger, a missing page in a correspondence, a faint signature beneath centuries of paint. They remind us that behind every map lies a human story, of curiosity, of defiance, and of the quiet terror that comes when truth threatens power. Perhaps these vanished cartographers were not lost at all. Perhaps they left their secrets for those willing to look closely enough, encoded in the margins, in the compass points, in the shapes of mountains that should not exist. Their silence was not surrender. It was preservation. And if one were to gather every surviving fragment, every ghost line, every erased island, perhaps the outline of Atlantis itself would begin to reappear, not as myth, but as memory. A memory the world once tried to erase, and the cartographers died trying to keep alive. Beneath the golden halls of the Vatican, past the frescoed ceilings and echoing corridors of faith, lies a silence that few have ever breached, a silence bound by iron doors and centuries of secrecy. Deep below St. Peter's Basilica, beyond the reach of pilgrims and scholars alike, stretches the Vatican's secret archives, an underground labyrinth of vaults containing over 80 kilometers of shelves. On those shelves rest letters, decrees, and ancient maps that may hold the most forbidden truths of all, including, some believe, the earliest surviving charts of Atlantis. For centuries, the Vatican's relationship with geography was paradoxical. On one hand, the Church financed voyages of discovery, sanctified new worlds, and mapped the spread of Christianity. On the other, it strictly controlled what was to be known, seen, or believed about Earth's past. Theologians declared that creation began in 4004 BC, that humanity's history was linear, divine, and bounded by Scripture. Yet explorers and scholars returning from the edges of the known world brought back stories and evidence that challenged that timeline. Artifacts that spoke of civilizations older than the flood, symbols that predated even the Tower of Babel. The Church listened, documented, and locked the evidence away. The earliest records of the Vatican's cartographic collection date to the 1400s, when Pope Nicholas V, a lover of ancient texts, ordered all geographical manuscripts entering Rome to be copied and preserved. What the world saw was the official version, beautifully illuminated maps declaring God's dominion over every continent. But what remained sealed away were the unorthodox versions, maps showing lands where none should exist, inscriptions referencing pre-Diluvian kingdoms, and sketches that matched the impossible coastlines later confirmed by modern science. Among these was one document cataloged as Mappa Mundi 17b, a chart describing the drowned lands of the Western Ocean. Its author was unnamed, its origin uncertain, its access restricted to the Pontifical Council on Natural Philosophy. Throughout the Renaissance, rumors persisted among scholars that the Vatican possessed documents proving the ancients had once known the full shape of the earth. A few even whispered that within the archives were maps copied from Alexandria's lost library, preserved by priests who fled the city before its final burning. These maps, it was said, have been entrusted to the Church as divine evidence of the world before Noah's flood, proof of civilizations destroyed for their hubris. In public, the Vatican denounced such tales as heresy, but in private, its curators continued to catalog every fragment that hinted at an older Earth. One of the most haunting stories comes from the 16th century. In 1572, a Jesuit scholar named Father Vincenzo Bellori was granted limited access to study the Atlantean fragments, a small collection of parchment stored in a sealed chest marked Residential Prohibiti, Forbidden Things. Bellori's surviving notes, later smuggled out of Rome, describe one map as depicting a great island between Iberia and the Indies, drawn with rings like the ripples of a dropped stone. Another showed coastlines curiously similar to South America, yet annotated with Greek letters, centuries before Columbus ever crossed the Atlantic. Bellori concluded that these maps must have been copied from relics of that ancient world whose destruction Plato describes. His report was never published. Days after his return to Florence, he was found dead, officially, of fever. The chest was sealed once more. During the Counter-Reformation, the Vatican's obsession with secrecy deepened. Pope Paul V ordered a complete restructuring of the archives, creating new vaults for dangerous documents. Geography, especially that which contradicted holy chronology, was deemed sensitive material. Jesuit cartographers were instructed to produce maps that glorified divine order, God's geometry, they called it, while quietly removing references to pagan or mythical lands. Behind closed doors, however, a few courageous priests continued to study the hidden charts, convinced they held the key to understanding God's earlier creations. By the 17th century, the secret archives had grown into a vast repository of forbidden geography. Scholars who gained rare access described strange maps depicting unknown symbols, concentric circles, tridents, and geometric patterns unlike any Christian iconography. Some bore inscriptions in lost languages: Atlantean, Egyptian, Sumerian. One visitor, a German theologian named Johann Weyer, wrote in a private letter, "I have seen a chart that shows a continent where none exists between the Western Ocean and the land of ice. The margins bear the words, the place of the 10 kings." Modern researchers have long tried to gain access to these alleged maps, but the Vatican remains guarded. In the early 20th century, when limited access was finally granted to a handful of historians, the most mysterious documents were still off limits. When questioned, archivists replied only that certain collections were restricted for reasons of preservation. A few who managed to see the maps under supervision noted their strange accuracy, the kind of precision impossible for medieval or Renaissance cartographers. Some described coastlines drawn as though from aerial perspective, an impossibility in the age before flight. One chilling discovery made by a 20th century Jesuit geographer, Father Karsten Brandt, adds to the mystery. He claimed to have found a reference in an internal catalog to something called Tabula Lucus Antiqua, the ancient map of light. The entry's description matched Plato's Atlantis almost exactly, a land divided by rings of water and earth, destroyed in one night by the wrath of the heavens. Brandt's notes were confiscated. The official Vatican statement declared the record a misinterpretation of metaphorical scripture. Brandt was reassigned to a monastery in the Alps, where he lived in silence until his death. If the Vatican truly holds such maps, the implications are staggering. They would prove that an ancient civilization, perhaps Atlantis, once mapped the globe in ways lost to modern science. They would also suggest that the Church has known about this possibility for centuries and chosen to keep it hidden, either to protect faith from doubt or to guard a truth too powerful to reveal. After all, what would it mean for the foundations of theology if the flood, the garden, or the fall of man were not isolated myths, but echoes of a real event that reshaped the world? And yet, the silence continues. Requests for information about pre-flood maps are routinely denied. Photographs are forbidden. Even the archive's internal staff are divided by clearance levels, each restricted from knowing too much about the other's work. But every now and then, a new fragment surfaces, a leaked sketch, a forgotten inventory, a misplaced citation, and the same haunting question returns. Why does the Vatican guard its maps more fiercely than its relics? Perhaps the answer lies in faith, not in God, but in control. Knowledge, after all, is a kind of power. And in the heart of Rome, deep beneath the marble and the prayers, may lie the ultimate proof that our world was once far older, far stranger, and far more connected than we have ever been told. And if those forbidden maps were ever revealed to the world, they might do more than redraw our understanding of history. They might force us to confront the greatest heresy of all. But the story of Atlantis was never a myth, but a memory the Vatican has spent 5 centuries trying to forget. In the middle of the Atlantic, where the sea churns with a restless energy and the horizon seems endless, lie the Azores, 9 volcanic islands scattered across the ocean like fragments of shattered world. For centuries, sailors have marveled at their sudden appearance, their lush greenery rising from waters otherwise dominated by deep blue. But for some historians and cryptographers, the Azores represent more than beauty or navigational markers. They may be the final vestiges of something far older, the lost highlands of Atlantis itself. The idea is not new. Ancient maritime lore speaks of islands that vanish beneath the waves, leaving only myths and distorted memories. Greek and Egyptian texts mention lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules, fertile, circular, divided by concentric canals, and eventually swallowed by the sea in a single night and day of catastrophe. Plato's description of Atlantis matches this legend almost perfectly. When explorers in the 15th and 16th centuries reached the mid-Atlantic, many reported strange phenomena: sudden shallows, submerged rock formations, and thermal vents that hinted at the presence of underwater mountains. Could these be the remnants of a once great civilization? In the early 1500s, Portuguese navigators recorded anomalies near the Azores. Gaspar Corte-Real wrote of islands that appeared briefly on the horizon, then seemed to sink or disappear entirely. Later, in 1584, Abraham Ortelius, one of the most renowned cartographers of his time, included the Azores in his Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, but annotated them with peculiar symbols, spirals, concentric circles, and strange lines pointing westward. Some scholars believe these markings were attempts to indicate submerged land masses, remnants of a world that had been erased by the ocean. Modern geologists have begun to take these ancient observations seriously. Studies of the Azores reveal a complex system of seamounts and submerged plateaus stretching for hundreds of kilometers beneath the surface. Bathymetric maps show structures that appear almost engineered: straight edges, circular depressions, and ridge formations that some argue cannot be entirely natural. When overlaid with the harmonic ratios found in Renaissance maps, the coincidence is remarkable. The positions of the islands align with the hypothetical locations of Atlantis' concentric rings. Researchers such as Dr. Amara Kuhn have theorized that the Azores are not merely islands, but the peaks of a submerged highland, a mountainous skeleton of the lost continent. If Atlantis once existed, these islands may have been its last visible remnants, resisting the ocean's pull while the surrounding land sank. Kuhn's sonar studies detected anomalies beneath the seabed, echo patterns consistent with artificial structures, possibly walls or canals, although strong ocean currents and sediment shifts make definitive confirmation difficult. Portuguese and Spanish sailors carried similar suspicions in their logs. Tales of ghost islands, land that appeared and disappeared within days, are scattered throughout their 16th century chronicles. These reports, once dismissed as superstition or poor navigation, have intrigued historians attempting to reconstruct the memory of Atlantis. Some suggest that the repeated appearance of these islands in early cartography reflects knowledge passed down from pre-Roman mariners, whose stories were preserved in monastic libraries and copied by Renaissance mapmakers. The Azores' volcanic activity also offers an explanation for these legends. Eruptions, subsidence, and rising sea levels over millennia could have erased evidence of earlier, higher land. Geophysical modeling suggests that parts of the seamount chain underlying the Azores may have been above sea level as recently as 10,000 years ago, coinciding with dates proposed by proponents of the pre-flood hypothesis for Atlantis. If true, these islands could represent both a literal and symbolic bridge between myth and reality. Physical remnants of an ancient world slowly disappearing beneath the waves. In addition to geological clues, some researchers point to unusual magnetic anomalies in the region. Satellite magnetometry detects rhythmic pulses in specific alignments, echoing the geometric coordinates found in Renaissance maps and the cipher of the sea, discovered by Dr. Elias Romero. While skeptics argue these are natural formations or artifacts of volcanic minerals, others see the pattern as too precise to be random, a hidden memory encoded in the very crust of the ocean floor. Folklore around the Azores adds another layer of intrigue. Local legends speak of underwater cities glimpsed by divers, of fish that swim in strange formations, and of currents that behave unnaturally, as if flowing around hidden structures. In the 18th century, fishermen reported seeing enormous stones beneath shallow waters, arranged in circular patterns. These stones were often attributed to giant sea creatures in popular tales, but some believe they were the remains of Atlantean architecture, their purpose lost to time. The notion that Atlantis might survive in part, hidden beneath the ocean, challenges centuries of skepticism. Scholars who explore the Azores encounter both awe and frustration. Awe at the possibility that myth and geology intersect, frustration at the difficulty of proving what the sea keeps secret. Each expedition yields tantalizing hints, sonar readings, unusual magnetic fields, submerged ridges, but no definitive proof of human habitation. And yet, the fragments line up with centuries of encoded maps, legends, and harmonic ratios, suggesting that someone, somewhere, once knew exactly what lay beneath the waves. For historians, geologists, and cryptographers, the Azores are more than islands. They are the ultimate test of human curiosity, a place where the echoes of a lost civilization may still resonate, waiting for the day when someone deciphers the full map. They remind us that Atlantis, if it ever existed, was not a single point on a map, but a story written across the oceans, remembered in symbols, preserved in myth, and perhaps lingering beneath the very waves that explorers have long sailed. And so, the Azores remain a silent sentinel, rising from the Atlantic as a question to the ages. Could these islands be the last visible memory of a civilization the world forgot, a highland that survived while the rest of Atlantis sank in a legend? The sea guards its secrets well, but every ripple, every ridge, every anomaly tells the same haunting story. The story of a world that once was, and the fragments that refuse to vanish entirely. Beneath the restless waves of the Atlantic, where sunlight barely penetrates and currents swirl like liquid shadows, lie secrets that have defied human understanding for millennia. For centuries, sailors, fishermen, and later, marine explorers have reported anomalies, shapes that appear unnatural, ridges that run straight as if carved by hands long vanished. Some of these submerged formations, researchers now believe, may be the drowned remnants of civilizations older than any written record, possibly even fragments of the legendary Atlantis. The first recorded observations of underwater ruins date back to the early 16th century, when Portuguese fishermen near the Azores reported encountering sunken stones arranged in perfect circles and straight lines. They spoke of formations that resembled streets, walls, and what seemed like plazas. Many dismissed these tales as exaggeration, drunken storytelling, or optical illusions caused by shifting sand and sunlight. Yet, the consistency of the reports across decades, even centuries, suggested a pattern too precise to ignore. Modern technology has allowed us to investigate these mysteries in ways unimaginable to those early observers. Sonar mapping, deep-sea submersibles, and satellite imaging have revealed submerged plateaus, terraces, and geometric shapes across wide areas of the Atlantic seabed. Near the Azores and the Caribbean, researchers have discovered ridges forming nearly perfect rectangles, circular formations that mimic Plato's concentric rings, and stone-like structures protruding from sand-covered mounds. While natural geological processes can explain some anomalies, the regularity and symmetry of certain structures continue to baffle scientists. One of the most intriguing discoveries comes from sonar studies off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas. In the 1960s, diver and researcher William Donato first documented submerged limestone blocks arranged in linear patterns. To his astonishment, some blocks bore carvings resembling ancient hieroglyphic-like symbols. Subsequent expeditions confirmed additional formations, a causeway-like path, rectangular foundations, and depressions that appeared to be streets or canals. Radiocarbon dating of nearby sediments suggested that these formations could be over 10,000 years old, coinciding eerily with the supposed timeline of Atlantis' demise. Researchers like Dr. Klaus Vogel have proposed that such formations may be the remnants of a highly advanced prehistoric civilization, lost to the ocean through cataclysmic events. Tectonic shifts, rising sea levels, and massive floods could have submerged entire cities within a short period, leaving only fragments visible to those who know where to look. The precision of certain structures, straight edges, right angles, and circular layouts challenges the conventional assumption that human construction at such an early period could achieve this level of planning. The phenomenon is not isolated to the Atlantic. Similar underwater anomalies have been reported off the coasts of Japan, Cuba, and the Mediterranean. In many cases, ancient myths align with these discoveries. The city of Yanaguni in Japan, for instance, features terraces and steps carved from rock beneath the waves. Local legends speak of a kingdom drowned in a single night. In Cuba, sonar scans have revealed a submerged network of structures off the northwest coast, sparking debates about pre-Columbian civilizations with unexpected sophistication. The recurrence of such sites worldwide suggests a pattern, a global memory of lost lands that were once above water. Historical texts provide additional corroboration. Plato's account of Atlantis describes a city with concentric rings of water and land, canals, and harbors. Surprisingly, some underwater formations discovered near the Azores echo these very patterns, with circular depressions and stone alignments suggesting harbors or central citadels. While skeptics argue these are coincidental natural formations, the parallels between ancient narratives and physical evidence cannot be entirely dismissed. Could the ancients have preserved a memory of a real event, encoded through myth, symbol, and oral tradition? Diving in these regions is not without danger. Currents, sudden storms, and underwater topography make exploration treacherous. Yet explorers report a strange sense of reverence when approaching certain sites, a feeling as if the ruins themselves hold a memory, a faint echo of human voices long silenced. Some divers claim to feel vibrations, hear unexplainable sounds, or see flickers of light reflecting off stones that cannot be accounted for by natural physics. Whether these experiences are psychological or mystical, they have contributed to the legend that Atlantis may not be entirely lost. The scientific study of these sites is complicated by accessibility and politics. Many locations lie within national waters, requiring permits that can take months or years to secure. Deep-sea expeditions are expensive, and the potential for sensationalism in media coverage has caused some researchers to proceed cautiously. Despite these obstacles, every survey, every sonar map, every photograph brings new tantalizing evidence. Terraces, walls, straight alignments, circular formations, and depressions too regular to be accidental. What is striking is the way these underwater ruins seem to mirror human cognitive patterns. Unlike random geological formations, the layouts suggest planning, engineering, and purpose. Some formations are aligned with cardinal directions, while others seem to correspond with astronomical phenomena. Could the designers have intended to encode knowledge in the very shape of their cities? If Atlantis existed, might its architect have left a blueprint beneath the sea, readable only by those attuned to the geometry of memory and myth? These discoveries challenge our understanding of history. If even a fraction of these submerged ruins is human-made, it implies that ancient civilizations possessed knowledge and engineering capabilities far beyond what is conventionally accepted. It raises the possibility that the myths of Atlantis, rather than being allegorical cautionary tales, are based on collective memory, a record of real places lost to time and oceanic cataclysms. And so, the underwater ruins of the Atlantic and beyond remain a siren call to explorers, historians, and dreamers alike. They are echoes of a civilization that may have existed, submerged by the waters of time, but never entirely erased. Each formation, each anomaly, whispers the same haunting story, a world once advanced, once inhabited, and once vibrant, now lying silent beneath waves that have guarded its secrets for millennia. To follow these echoes is to walk a line between science and legend, between history and imagination. For those who seek Atlantis, the ocean itself may be both adversary and guide, hiding the past while hinting at its impossible persistence. And in those sunken cities, if they are indeed human-made, lie the faintest traces of civilization that dared to dream of greatness, and pay the ultimate price to be remembered only in whispers beneath the waves. The age of Renaissance exploration is often celebrated as a triumph of curiosity and courage, a period when European sailors set out into unknown waters to chart the world and expand their empires. Yet beneath the glittering tales of discovery, gold, and conquest, there existed a quieter, more mysterious dimension. Voyages guided not by maps alone, but by secret instructions, hidden knowledge, and coded warnings passed down through generations of scholars, priests, and mapmakers. Some of these secret directions may have pointed to a destination that was both real and legendary: Atlantis. Many explorers carried more than compasses and astrolabes when they set sail. They bore letters from patrons like the Medici, cryptic maps, and notes encoded with symbols that could only be interpreted by those in the know. These instructions were not always about trade routes or territorial claims. Sometimes they referenced impossible coastlines, islands that appeared and disappeared, or waters described in texts centuries older than the explorers themselves. Christopher Columbus, for example, received a letter from the Portuguese cartographer Paulo Toscanelli, containing precise measurements and a westward path that purportedly led to lands unknown. While Columbus believed he was reaching Asia, the underlying logic of the instructions hinted at a far more complex objective: locating remnants of ancient civilizations lost to history. Other explorers were less fortunate, or perhaps more discreet. Portuguese navigator Gaspar Corte Real, in his journals, spoke of islands that were only visible for a few days each year, rising and sinking with the tides. He hinted at secret markers, stones, reefs, or currents that could guide those who understood the old codes. His disappearance during a voyage in 1501 added an air of dread to the pursuit of hidden lands. Scholars suggest that the instructions Corte-Real followed may have been part of a hidden network of knowledge preserved since antiquity, designed to ensure that only the worthy could reach these mysterious territories. Renaissance letters often contained elaborate allegories. A sailor might be told to follow the serpent of the west until the trident kisses the sun, or to seek the island where the rings of water embrace the land in concentric embrace. To the casual reader, these phrases were poetic nonsense. To those trained in the secret language of mapmakers, they were precise navigational cues, often corresponding to submerged ridges, tidal patterns, or islands appearing seasonally due to geological uplift or ocean currents. These instructions suggest that Renaissance explorers were being guided not merely by curiosity, but by knowledge of lands that had been hidden from the general world, potentially remnants of Atlantis itself. The secrecy surrounding these voyages was enforced by both political and religious authority. Monarchs and church officials understood that knowledge of such lands could challenge existing power structures. A map or a letter that hinted at a lost civilization was treated as dangerously potent. In some cases, explorers were sworn to secrecy under threat of death. Others were given instructions only orally, ensuring that the information could not be documented publicly. These precautions created a pattern. When explorers disappeared or returned without detailed reports, fragments of their observations often appeared years later, embedded in maps, letters, or allegorical art. The methods used to encode instructions were sophisticated. Compass roses were not just decorative. They often contained hidden letters or coordinates. Illustrations of mythological creatures pointed toward natural formations, while the size and placement of islands could indicate submerged ridges. One of the most famous examples is the map allegedly used by Columbus on his first voyage. Scholars who have studied surviving fragments suggest that beyond marking trade winds and known lands, it contains subtle hints of western islands and submerged features, possibly guiding him toward regions aligned with Atlantis legends. Italian cartographers like Battista Agnes and Giacomo Gastaldi employed similar techniques. Agnes's atlases, created for noble patrons in Venice, feature allegorical islands, concentric rings, and intricate annotations that might otherwise appear decorative. Gastaldi's 16th century charts of the Atlantic include faintly drawn circles in the mid-ocean, precisely where Plato described Atlantis' concentric harbors. To a casual observer, these details were minor flourishes. To those trained in the secret code, they were instructions. Secret instructions were also transmitted through oral tradition, often in universities or private academies. Scholars like Toscanelli and his contemporaries held informal lectures in Florence, teaching students to read the sea and interpret symbolic maps. The knowledge was intentionally fragmented, passed in pieces to prevent discovery by those outside the inner circle. In some cases, cryptic manuscripts were hidden in plain sight, bound as theology or astrology texts, readable only by those familiar with the layered codes. This network of concealed knowledge raises profound questions about the true purpose of Renaissance exploration. Were these voyages motivated solely by empire, profit, or religious conversion? Or were some driven by a higher curiosity? The search for a lost civilization that had mapped the world long before Europe's first explorers set sail? The convergence of myth, geometry, and navigational precision in surviving documents suggests that the pursuit of Atlantis was real, guiding decisions behind the scenes in ways history has barely acknowledged. Yet following these instructions was perilous. Storms, disease, hostile encounters, and uncharted reefs claimed countless lives. The ocean itself became both protector and adversary, ensuring that only fragments of knowledge survived. Those who returned often reported nothing beyond the known islands, leaving cryptographers and scholars to piece together the fragments from letters, sketches, and marginal notes. And in some cases, what they brought back was deliberately altered, diluted, or censored by authorities fearful of what might be revealed. Despite the centuries, these secret instructions have left a traceable legacy. Modern historians and researchers continue to decode Renaissance maps, finding that seemingly fantastical features, disappearing islands, unusual currents, concentric circles, align with underwater topography confirmed by sonar mapping. Even the cryptic language of allegory seems to follow geometric and mathematical rules, suggesting that these were not stories, but navigational systems designed to convey knowledge inaccessible by ordinary means. The true brilliance of these Renaissance instructions lies in their duality. Outwardly, they appear as decorative flourishes or poetic notes. Inwardly, they encode practical, precise guidance. They preserve ancient memory in a form designed to survive centuries of oversight, censorship, and disaster. Following them, even partially, is to walk in the footsteps of those who believed Atlantis was not myth, but a real, navigable, and discoverable place, a civilization remembered in symbols, guarded in secrecy, and hidden beneath the waves. And so, every map, letter, and coded instruction is more than history. It is an invitation, a whisper from the past, urging the curious to seek beyond the familiar horizon, to consider that the world of Renaissance explorers was not only the known Earth, but also the memory of a lost civilization that may still leave its echoes in the Atlantic, waiting for those bold enough to follow its secret path. Long before modern historians began questioning the very existence of Atlantis, there were chroniclers who took great pains to preserve its memory, but not in plain text. Across the Mediterranean and Western Europe, scholars, alchemists, and philosophers embedded their knowledge within ciphers, codes, and enigmatic allegories, ensuring that the truth could survive centuries of persecution, ignorance, and natural disasters. These ciphered chronicles are more than cryptography. They are deliberate acts of memory, a hidden language designed to outlast the world's attempts to forget. One of the earliest known ciphered accounts comes from the 10th century, attributed to an anonymous monk in Constantinople. His manuscript, later rediscovered in Venice, contained illustrations of circular cities, concentric waterways, and inscriptions in a code combining Greek letters, numbers, and astrological symbols. Scholars who first examined it dismissed the manuscript as fanciful allegory, yet careful decoding reveals references to flooding, lost technologies, and a kingdom swallowed by the ocean in a single night and day, unmistakably echoing Plato's account of Atlantis. The text is not just storytelling. It is a cartographic memory encoded into narrative form. By the Renaissance, the practice of ciphering knowledge had become systematic. Alchemists, particularly in Florence and Venice, often kept notebooks filled with encrypted observations. These texts combined astrology, geometry, and myth to obscure their meaning from the uninitiated. One notable example is the work of the scholar Girolamo Cardano, who embedded a series of coded references to Western rings of water and land in his otherwise mathematical treatises. While Cardano was widely respected as a physician and mathematician, few contemporaries understood that he was preserving fragments of pre-flood memory, disguised as abstract problems and formulas. The reasoning behind such cryptography was simple knowledge was dangerous. To suggest that an ancient civilization had flourished, perished, and left a legacy hidden beneath the ocean challenged both religious orthodoxy and political authority. Maps, letters, and chronicles that hinted at Atlantis could be construed as heresy or sedition. To survive, information had to be hidden in plain sight, within allegories, poetry, and ciphers. These chronicles were therefore designed to communicate to future generations, who would possess the tools and courage to decipher them. In Spain and Portugal, where the age of discovery coincided with intense maritime exploration, navigators and scholars often exchanged cipher documents. The famed cartographer Pedro Reynel included in his atlases cryptic symbols, triangles, spirals, and concentric arcs that appeared to encode longitudes, submerged landforms, and even temporal references. His annotations, preserved in private collections, suggested a working knowledge of Atlantis' location, but only those versed in the secret symbology could interpret them. Other cartographers, such as Diego Ribeiro, followed similar practices, creating maps that outwardly recorded trade routes while secretly preserving ancient knowledge in encoded forms. The cipher chronicles were not limited to Europe. In the Mediterranean, Arab scholars maintained libraries of texts combining Greek, Phoenician, and Egyptian sources. Among these were manuscripts describing islands beyond the known ocean, submerged temples, and civilizations destroyed by cataclysmic floods. The documents were often written in a combination of Arabic numerals, symbolic drawings, and marginal glosses in encrypted shorthand. These texts influenced Renaissance scholars, who incorporated similar methods into their maps and manuscripts, creating a continuous thread of hidden memory stretching across centuries and cultures. Deciphering these chronicles requires more than linguistic skill. It demands an understanding of geometry, astronomy, and natural philosophy. Many texts encode spatial relationships using ratios derived from harmonic proportions, mapping ancient cities or coastlines in relation to the stars. A manuscript from Florence, for example, illustrates a series of concentric circles, each corresponding to lunar cycles, tidal patterns, and navigational bearings, effectively creating a multidimensional map of Atlantis' supposed layout, accessible only to those capable of decoding the celestial references. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect of these chronicles is their blend of caution and confidence. The authors knew they were risking persecution, yet they encoded with remarkable precision. Every cipher, spiral, and allegorical illustration appears deliberate, designed to guide the initiated toward understanding without revealing the truth to the unprepared. It is as though the writers anticipated that the world would forget, but that the memory of Atlantis could survive in carefully curated fragments. Some chronicles even hint at a broader philosophical purpose. Atlantis, according to certain coded texts, was not merely a physical location. It was a symbol of knowledge, harmony, and human potential. Its destruction was both literal and moral, a lesson about pride, greed, and the fragility of civilizations. By encoding its memory, chroniclers ensured that the lesson would survive, teaching future generations through symbols and allegories rather than direct narrative. The codes are therefore both cartographic and ethical, maps of lost lands and maps of human experience. Modern scholars have only begun to scratch the surface of these cipher chronicles. Multispectral imaging, computer-assisted decryption, and cross-cultural linguistic analysis are slowly revealing patterns hidden for centuries. Symbols long thought decorative are now understood as part of an elaborate system combining geometry, astronomy, and mythology. In some cases, encoded directions align with underwater formations discovered via sonar, suggesting that the chronicles were more than intellectual exercises. They were practical guides to lost lands. Yet the mystery remains. Even when deciphered, the chronicles do not provide a straightforward roadmap. They are fragments of memory, layered with metaphor and protective coding, meant to be interpreted, tested, and corroborated. Following them is as much an exercise in intuition as in scholarship, demanding patience, creativity, and a willingness to see beyond conventional history. The ciphered chronicles of Atlantis demonstrate that the story of a lost civilization was never forgotten entirely. It was preserved in symbols, hidden in codes, and transmitted through generations who understood the peril of speaking plainly. And for those willing to read between the lines, these texts offer a tantalizing possibility that the memory of Atlantis, encoded with care and intelligence, has survived to guide us in understanding not only a lost world, but also the enduring human desire to remember, preserve, and uncover what others would have us forget. In the end, the chronicles whisper the same haunting message that has echoed through the centuries. Atlantis may have been destroyed, submerged beneath the waves, and erased from memory, but its echoes remain, waiting for those who can decipher the ciphered story and uncover the civilization that time tried to bury. History is filled with objects that vanish mysteriously, leaving behind tantalizing fragments of a story too compelling to ignore. Among these are artifacts allegedly linked to Atlantis, items described in journals, letters, and merchant records, then disappearing into private collections, shipwrecks, or vaults never open to the public. These lost relics, though few in number, suggest a civilization of astonishing sophistication, hinting at a culture capable of engineering, art, and knowledge that rivaled or even surpassed the ancients we know. One of the earliest references comes from a 14th century Genoese sailor who wrote of a sunken city visible during extreme low tides near an uncharted island in the mid-Atlantic. According to his log, he recovered fragments of carved stone, columns adorned with concentric circles, statues depicting figures holding strange instruments, and a set of polished tablets covered in undecipherable markings. These items were reportedly smuggled into Venice, cataloged by scholars, and then vanished from official records, leaving only vague descriptions in private diaries. The Renaissance produced similar stories. Collectors and travelers brought back curious objects from the Atlantic islands and northern Africa. A Florentine merchant named Lorenzo di Matteo wrote of an obsidian disc etched with a geometric pattern, which he claimed came from a land swallowed by the sea before memory begins. He presented it to the Medici court, only for it to be immediately confiscated and stored in a secret cabinet. Di Matteo noted in his journal, "I fear this object is both too beautiful and too dangerous to remain in mortal hands. Its fate remains unknown." Some of these vanished artifacts may have been technological in nature. Ancient texts describe machines of bronze and crystal capable of harnessing water and light in ways unfamiliar to their time. A few surviving sketches in European manuscripts hint at water-driven mechanisms, sophisticated gears, and hydraulic systems. While most scholars dismiss these as fanciful imagination, they echo Plato's account of Atlantis, a civilization capable of manipulating natural forces with precision, leaving behind artifacts that confounded subsequent generations. Other artifacts appear to be ceremonial or symbolic. References to gold and silver objects inscribed with concentric circles, tridents, and sun motifs recur in private letters and catalogs from Portugal, Spain, and Italy. Some are said to resonate with sound, creating harmonics when struck, possibly a form of musical or ritualistic encoding. While no verified examples exist today, these reports consistently describe objects that align with the concentric ring pattern associated with Atlantis, suggesting a cultural or religious continuity embedded in material form. Shipwrecks add another layer of mystery. Accounts from the 16th and 17th centuries describe vessels returning from Atlantic expeditions laden with Atlantean treasures, only to vanish en route to Europe. In some cases, entire crews were lost, and the cargo disappeared into the depths. Historians like Dr. Ana Ribeiro suggest that these losses were not mere misfortune. Currents and volcanic activity in the mid-Atlantic make shipwrecks common, but the repeated targeting of specific voyages hints at human intervention, perhaps intentional concealment or retrieval by those who understood the object's significance. Even in the 18th century, reports of Atlantean artifacts persisted. In Lisbon, a scholar cataloged fragments of pottery and metalwork retrieved from near the Azores, noting that the designs bore no resemblance to contemporary European styles. He described them as foreign, yet precise, as if crafted with knowledge of mathematics and proportion unknown to us. Before he could publish his findings, the collection was seized, and he was warned against pursuing the matter further. His manuscripts were later found hidden in a monastery, but the objects themselves were never recovered. Archaeologists today debate whether these artifacts ever truly existed or whether they were embellished stories intended to provoke wonder or fear. Yet the consistency of descriptions across centuries and cultures suggests more than coincidence. Objects featuring concentric rings, unusual geometric precision, or lost technological knowledge appear in records from multiple independent sources, creating a web of evidence pointing toward a civilization that once thrived and was deliberately erased from the historical record. The possibility of genuine Atlantean artifacts has influenced modern exploration. In the 20th and 21st centuries, deep-sea expeditions have recovered unusual stone blocks, carvings, and tools from submerged Atlantic plateaus near the Azores, the Caribbean, and the Bahamas. While most can be attributed to natural processes or indigenous cultures, some items display characteristics that defy conventional dating, composition, or craftsmanship, anomalies that could represent remnants of civilization predating known history. These findings tantalize researchers but remain controversial, in part because of the lack of verified provenance and the tendency of such discoveries to vanish into private collections or academic obscurity. The vanished artifacts also reveal something fundamental about human memory and secrecy. Every recovered or recorded object carries a story, a cultural imprint that resonates with the legends of Atlantis. Even the loss of these items contributes to the myth, reinforcing the notion that Atlantis was both real and intentionally hidden. The disappearance of artifacts mirrors the disappearance of the civilization itself, a deliberate erasure to prevent knowledge, technology, or cultural memory from influencing the world. Collectors and historians continue to search for these relics, drawn by the dual promise of discovery and understanding. Each fragment could reveal insights into social structure, engineering, art, or spiritual life, knowledge erased from history, but preserved in the echoes of myth, the hidden corners of archives, and the cryptic accounts of those who dared to glimpse the lost world. Ultimately, the story of Atlantean artifacts is a story of human fascination and loss. They remind us that history is fragile, memory is vulnerable, and civilizations, no matter how advanced, can disappear entirely. Yet even in their absence, the descriptions, sketches, and cryptic references endure, leaving a trail for those who seek to reconstruct a civilization that vanished beneath the waves. For the modern seeker, these vanished artifacts are not merely curiosities. They are keys, fragile, hidden, and dangerous, to understanding a world lost to time, a civilization that challenged the limits of human achievement, and a memory that refuses to be fully extinguished. And in their shadows lies the enduring question: if Atlantis truly existed, what other wonders, knowledge, or technologies lie buried, waiting for the daring to uncover them? Legends of Atlantis often focus on its grandeur, wealth, and ultimate destruction, but the most intriguing aspect may lie in its science, knowledge so advanced that it appears almost supernatural to us today. Descriptions preserved in ancient texts and Renaissance documents suggest that Atlanteans mastered principles of engineering, astronomy, and energy far beyond the capacities of contemporary civilizations. Even scattered references imply that this knowledge was deliberately hidden, surviving only in cryptic manuscripts, secret teachings, and coded artifacts. Plato's dialogues hint at technological prowess. The Atlanteans constructed canals, bridges, and harbors arranged in concentric circles, allowing efficient transportation and resource distribution. They developed advanced metallurgy, producing bronze and other alloys with precision unmatched in the ancient world. Some passages describe machines powered by water and fire, seemingly capable of regulating flow, generating energy, and perhaps even manipulating natural phenomena. Scholars have debated whether these descriptions are allegorical, but the consistency with later artifacts and maps suggests a kernel of historical truth. Accounts from Renaissance scholars reinforce the idea of hidden knowledge. Leonardo da Vinci, fascinated by mechanics and water engineering, reportedly studied ancient manuscripts that were never published, some of which contained diagrams reminiscent of Atlantean structures and machinery. Jesuit scholars, collecting texts from Alexandria in Greece, noted cryptic passages about devices capable of harnessing tidal energy and storing water within underground reservoirs. The texts were considered too dangerous to disclose publicly, often encrypted or hidden in monastic libraries. The Atlanteans' mastery of geometry and harmonics also receives attention. Their cities were designed with a profound understanding of proportion, resonance, and the alignment of structures with celestial bodies. Renaissance cartographers and alchemists documented these ideas indirectly. Concentric circles, repeating patterns, and harmonic ratios appearing in maps of Atlantis correspond to locations where modern sonar surveys have identified underwater terraces, ridges, and anomalies. The mathematical precision suggests that Atlantean knowledge was both practical and symbolic, encoding information about the natural world in built forms. Some legends hint at even more mysterious capabilities. Ancient texts speak of crystals used as energy sources, perhaps for illumination, communication, or mechanical power. The Atlantean crystals are mentioned in medieval manuscripts, later referenced by 16th century alchemists and engineers. Though dismissed by many scholars as fantasy, recent studies of piezoelectric materials and energy amplification techniques suggest that early civilizations could have discovered and utilized natural properties of stones in ways that were lost over time. Could Atlantis have harnessed such principles, leaving traces that inspired later generations, but never fully survived? Maritime and astronomical knowledge also appears advanced. Atlanteans reportedly understood tides, currents, and wind patterns with remarkable precision. Renaissance navigators like Toscanelli and the anonymous authors of hidden maritime treatises may have inherited fragments of this knowledge, embedded in the secret instructions, ciphered maps, and encoded charts guiding Atlantic voyages. Some researchers argue that these insights allowed explorers to cross vast distances with remarkable accuracy long before modern instruments existed. Beyond the physical sciences, Atlantean texts suggest a sophisticated understanding of social and ecological systems. Cities were planned to maximize efficiency, health, and resource management. Agricultural terraces, aqueducts, and canal systems were interlinked with urban centers, hinting at integrated planning principles that anticipated modern engineering and sustainability. Some historians theorize that this knowledge formed the basis of esoteric teachings passed down in secret societies, later influencing Renaissance thinkers who incorporated the principles into art, architecture, and cryptic science. Yet, much of this knowledge was lost deliberately. Cataclysmic floods, wars, and deliberate erasure ensured that only fragments survived, often disguised in allegory, myth, or cryptography. The few artifacts and texts that remain, the vanished Atlantean discs, inscriptions, and coded manuscripts, suggest mastery over principles we are only beginning to rediscover. The knowledge was too advanced to coexist with emerging civilizations, threatening the established order and prompting secrecy. Modern researchers, intrigued by anomalies in underwater formations and inconsistencies in ancient maps, have attempted to reconstruct Atlantean science. By combining sonar data, geometric analysis, and historical accounts, they have identified patterns in submerged structures suggesting water management, mechanical engineering, and urban planning knowledge that aligns with Plato's descriptions. While definitive proof remains elusive, the convergence of evidence indicates that Atlantis may have been a civilization whose science surpassed the comprehension of contemporary societies, and whose legacy continues to challenge our understanding of human capability. Even today, scholars argue about the practical applications of Atlantean science. Could their knowledge of geometry, energy, and resonance have allowed sustainable urbanization on a massive scale? Were their hydraulic systems capable of manipulating water to power machinery or control floods? Could they have developed technologies lost to time, encoded in the artifacts, maps, and chronicles that survived centuries of secrecy? The tantalizing hints suggest that Atlantis was more than a myth. It was a civilization defined by innovation, intelligence, and foresight, a civilization whose secrets were deliberately concealed from history. The hidden science of Atlantis is therefore not merely a curiosity of history. It is a challenge to modern understanding. It compels us to question assumptions about human progress, the transmission of knowledge, and the possibility of advanced civilizations rising and falling long before recorded history. And perhaps, if enough fragments are decoded, if maps are interpreted correctly and artifacts rediscovered, we might glimpse a civilization whose technological and intellectual achievements could reshape our understanding of what humanity is capable of, a world lost to time, but never forgotten. The echoes of Atlantean science remain, waiting in maps, artifacts, and the cryptic writings of scholars who preserved its memory. For those willing to seek them, the challenge is clear: to decipher the knowledge encoded in the fragments of a civilization that mastered forces still mysterious to us, and to recognize that what we consider ancient may, in fact, be the remnants of a world far more advanced than our own. The Atlantean legacy endures, hidden yet persistent, a silent testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the enduring quest for understanding. Every legend of Atlantis culminates in its catastrophic downfall, a moment of destruction so complete that it transformed a thriving civilization into myth. Plato's account describes a city punished by the gods, swallowed by the sea, in a single day and night of misfortune. But beneath the poetic narrative, historical researchers and cryptographers suggest a more intricate story, one involving internal betrayal, political upheaval, and human hubris as much as natural disaster. According to some ciphered chronicles, the Atlanteans were a society divided. Their civilization, built on advanced science and meticulous planning, was governed by kings and councils whose authority depended on mastery of both material and symbolic knowledge. Within this elite, factions formed, some dedicated to preserving the city's wisdom, others motivated by greed and ambition. Tensions escalated over access to knowledge, control of resources, and the distribution of power, echoing patterns seen throughout human history. One faction, scholars argue, may have deliberately undermined the city, weakening its defenses, sabotaging infrastructure, or misusing technologies that had sustained the city for centuries. Legends speak of fire as a key element of Atlantis' destruction. Some accounts describe massive conflagrations engulfing the city, triggered by volcanic eruptions or human action. Certain manuscripts hint that energy devices, perhaps powered by water or crystal technology, were mismanaged or weaponized during internal conflicts, amplifying the devastation. Reports from Renaissance-era explorers describe islands in the Atlantic exhibiting evidence of subterranean heat and volcanic activity, phenomena that could align with these ancient descriptions. Modern geophysicists studying mid-Atlantic ridges note signs of sudden subsidence and lava flows, which may corroborate hints of cataclysm embedded in the texts. Natural forces, combined with human betrayal, likely sealed Atlantis' fate. Rising seas, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions would have devastated infrastructure and inundated canals, aqueducts, and buildings. Some scholars suggest that the city's concentric rings, engineered to harmonize with natural waterways, became a vulnerability, channeling tidal surges and creating destructive currents that accelerated the collapse. Catastrophe, in this reading, was both inevitable and amplified by human choices. The destruction was not only material, but symbolic, erasing a civilization that had reached heights unknown to neighboring societies. Historical echoes of betrayal persist in the writings of Renaissance scholars and explorers. Certain letters hint at keepers of knowledge who abandoned their posts or betrayed the city's secrets, perhaps out of fear or ambition. Allegorical poems describe towers crumbling from within, citadels collapsing under unseen pressures, and conspirators fleeing just before the final cataclysm. These stories, often encoded in ciphers or allegories, suggest that Atlantis' downfall was not purely divine punishment, but intertwined with human agency, a civilization undone by its own brilliance and division. Maritime accounts from the 15th and 16th centuries hint at survivors or witnesses. Sailors spoke of distant islands appearing briefly above water, remnants of mountains or urban structures peeking through the waves before vanishing again. Some reported drifting debris, strange stone formations, or odd currents behaving unnaturally. Though anecdotal, these accounts reinforce the notion that the final cataclysm left traces, fragments of civilization still visible to those who dared to venture into the Atlantic. The final cataclysm also resonates in myths beyond the Mediterranean. Indigenous legends from the Caribbean, West Africa, and South America describe great floods, sunken cities, and vanished peoples. Scholars suggest that these oral traditions may preserve echoes of Atlantean destruction, transmitted across generations and continents. Even if the stories were mythologized, they reflect a shared memory of sudden and dramatic loss, perhaps tied to actual geological events in the Atlantic around 10,000 years ago. Plato's account, often considered purely allegorical, gains new weight when combined with physical and textual evidence. Catastrophe, both natural and human-made, seems plausible. Rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, tectonic shifts along the mid-Atlantic ridge, and volcanic activity could have combined with internal strife to wipe out a civilization that otherwise might have endured. The rapidity of the destruction, one day and night, may be exaggerated for literary effect, but the underlying narrative aligns with both geological and historical patterns. The concept of betrayal adds a profound emotional layer to the story. Atlantis was not merely lost to nature. It was undone by choices, ambition, and perhaps hubris. The moral of this loss is preserved in cryptic manuscripts, allegorical texts, and Renaissance maps. Knowledge, power, and advanced technology are dangerous when wielded without unity, wisdom, or ethical restraint. The downfall is therefore both a historical and philosophical lesson, echoing across time as a cautionary tale about the limits of human mastery. Artifacts and ciphered chronicles hint at last-minute efforts to preserve knowledge. Some texts describe sacred objects being hidden, maps being encoded, and scrolls sent to distant lands. The vanished artifacts, the encoded manuscripts, and the concealed instructions all testify to a civilization desperate to survive its own end, to ensure that while the city sank, fragments of its wisdom might endure, waiting for future generations bold enough to uncover them. The story of Atlantis' final moments is thus a tapestry woven from fire, water, betrayal, and courage. It combines the inevitability of natural disaster with the tragic consequences of internal division, creating a narrative that is as emotionally powerful as it is mysterious. The cataclysm serves as both an ending and a beginning. While the city vanished, its memory, artifacts, and coded knowledge survived, challenging explorers, historians, and dreamers to piece together the civilization that once soared so high and fell so completely. In contemplating the final cataclysm, we are reminded of the fragile balance between ambition and wisdom, technology and responsibility. Atlantis' destruction is a warning and an invitation to explore, decode, and reflect on the consequences of human ingenuity. The echoes of fire and betrayal linger beneath the waves, whispering a story that is both cautionary and endlessly compelling, urging us to consider not only what was lost, but what might still be recovered. The story of Atlantis does not end with its submergence. Across centuries, explorers, scholars, and dreamers have attempted to rediscover what was lost, following traces hidden in ancient texts, Renaissance maps, and cryptic chronicles. The modern quest for Atlantis is a blend of science, intuition, and imagination, driven by the tantalizing possibility that a civilization once thought mythical may have left tangible evidence waiting to be found beneath the waves. In the 19th century, oceanographers began systematically charting the Atlantic, noting unusual ridges, plateaus, and underwater formations. Some suggested that these geological features corresponded to Plato's descriptions: circular terraces, concentric waterways, and elevated central islands. Early sonar studies revealed additional anomalies near the Azores, the Caribbean, and off the coast of Cuba, sparking renewed speculation that Atlantis had a historical basis. Researchers debated whether these formations were natural or the remnants of human construction, but the persistent pattern of anomalies drew attention from scientists and explorers alike. The 20th century saw a surge in technological capability, allowing for deeper and more precise investigation. Submersibles and deep-sea cameras captured images of terraces, linear formations, and stone structures lying beneath the ocean floor. Marine archaeologists documented features near Bimini and the Bahamas that suggested roads, causeways, and walls, echoing descriptions from Plato and Renaissance maps. While skeptics attributed these structures to natural geological processes, some anomalies, The perfect right angles, the uniformity of block sizes, and certain carvings remained unexplained, hinting at human intervention. Parallel to underwater exploration, scholars revisited historical documents with fresh eyes. Renaissance maps were reanalyzed, revealing subtle symbols, allegorical islands, and encoded notations pointing to submerged landforms. The secret instructions of explorers, long considered fanciful, were decoded with modern computational tools, uncovering references to western rings of water and hidden harbors, precisely where underwater surveys had located anomalous formations. These discoveries suggested that Renaissance navigators might have inherited fragments of Atlantean knowledge, transmitted through ciphers, allegories, and secret networks of scholarship. Expeditions in the late 20th and early 21st centuries combined traditional exploration with cutting-edge technology. Satellite imaging, sonar mapping, and 3D underwater modeling allowed researchers to examine submerged terraces and plateaus in unprecedented detail. Some formations appeared to match the concentric ring structures described in Plato's dialogues, while others corresponded to locations marked in secretive Renaissance maps. These correlations reinforced the possibility that Atlantis was not merely myth, but a real civilization whose memory had been encoded into both geography and human culture. Modern explorers have also turned to historical artifacts for clues. Vanished Atlantean objects, long lost to time, are being studied through archival records, private collections, and digital reconstructions. Patterns in design, geometry, and symbolism suggest sophisticated technology and knowledge, reinforcing the idea that Atlantis may have possessed scientific and cultural advancements far beyond its contemporaries. Though most physical evidence remains elusive, each rediscovered reference adds a layer of plausibility to the centuries-old narrative. The search for Atlantis today is not just a physical endeavor, but an intellectual and philosophical journey. Researchers analyze ancient texts, ciphered chronicles, and Renaissance maps, combining historical scholarship with geology, oceanography, and cryptography. This interdisciplinary approach reflects the complexity of the Atlantean legacy, a civilization that blended technology, artistry, philosophy, and mathematics in ways modern science is only beginning to comprehend. Public fascination has fueled the quest as well. Documentaries, books, and digital media have popularized Atlantean exploration, inspiring enthusiasts to participate in mapping, diving, and archival research. While sensationalism occasionally clouds scientific rigor, the attention has led to funding, collaboration, and discoveries that might otherwise have been impossible. Citizen scientists, equipped with sonar devices and satellite data, now contribute to an ongoing global effort to trace the remnants of a civilization lost to the sea. Despite these advances, rediscovery remains elusive. Atlantis, if it exists, is likely scattered beneath thousands of square miles of ocean, concealed by centuries of sediment, tectonic shifts, and rising seas. Any remaining artifacts may be fragile, dispersed, or buried, and deciphering historical clues requires patience, skill, and often intuition. Yet the pursuit continues, driven by the enduring allure of uncovering a civilization that achieved greatness, only to vanish almost entirely from history. The modern quest also confronts profound philosophical questions. What would the confirmed discovery of Atlantis mean for humanity? Could it redefine our understanding of technological and cultural evolution, challenging assumptions about ancient civilizations? Would the knowledge encoded in surviving artifacts, texts, and submerged structures reveal scientific principles lost to time? The possibility that Atlantis' wisdom still echoes beneath the waves, waiting to be uncovered, adds both urgency and wonder to every expedition. In pursuing Atlantis, explorers confront not just the ocean, but time itself. They navigate historical enigmas, coded manuscripts, and fragmented accounts, piecing together a civilization that existed at the intersection of myth, memory, and reality. The search is as much about understanding human ambition, ingenuity, and the consequences of hubris as it is about locating submerged cities. Each dive, each map analysis, and each decoded cipher brings humanity closer to reconnecting with a world that was once lost but never forgotten. Rediscovering Atlantis is therefore a journey that transcends geography. It is a pursuit of knowledge, a challenge to skepticism, and a meditation on the endurance of human memory. For every artifact recovered, every map decoded, and every anomaly surveyed, the story of Atlantis grows more compelling, bridging the gap between legend and history. It reminds us that civilizations, no matter how complete their destruction, leave traces in the oceans, in the archives, and in the enduring curiosity of those willing to seek them. And so, the modern quest for Atlantis continues, guided by science, imagination, and the unyielding human desire to uncover what has been lost. The ocean may guard its secrets fiercely, yet the echoes of a civilization that dared to dream, to innovate, and ultimately to vanish remain within reach. For those willing to listen, follow, and interpret, Atlantis is not merely a story of destruction. It is a story of discovery, waiting patiently beneath the waves, whispering to those bold enough to seek the forgotten truth.